Hello and welcome. I'm Pip Tomson and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Syria's opposition group reach Aleppo as they say they've taken control of towns and villages in the surrounding area. Russia's defense minister touches down in North Korea for talks with political leaders, cementing the two countries' military ties. The UK could legalise assisted dying after an historic vote by MPs. And President Macron is the guest of honour at Notre-Dame's cathedral, which has been given a €700 million renovation following the devastating 2019 fire. Thousands of Syrian opposition fighters are approaching the centre of Aleppo in Syria as they attempt to recapture the city for the first time since 2016. They've taken control of dozens of towns and cities in the surrounding countryside, despite being confronted by the Syrian military and Iranian proxies. Public transport in Aleppo to Damascus has been diverted, according to Syrian media. For more on this, I'm joined in the studio by Al Arabiya's military expert, Riad Kahwaji. Hello to you, Riad. Thanks ever so much for coming in to talk to me about this, because it is incredibly significant. As I just said there, it's the first time since government forces recaptured it in 2016 that these opposition groups have got into Aleppo. Give me the background to this offensive and also what the possible ramifications are.
This is an offensive that started 48 hours ago, and from the first glance we can see a major intelligence failure on the part of the Syrians and their Russian allies. They could not see these forces massing and launching this blitzkrieg that managed to capture the entire western side of Aleppo's province and parts of the southern side of Aleppo, the whole countryside, the major highway linking Aleppo with Damascus, cutting off supply route to the city itself. This is a major failure here on the part of the Syrian regime, and then a surprise retreat. These forces have advanced with barely any serious resistance from the Syrian military. Also, the Iranian proxies were not there in the big numbers because, as you remember, only 48 hours ago, there was a ceasefire in Lebanon.
OK, so let me just ask you about the timing of this then. It can't be just coincidence, and they've been very speedy in doing this, haven't they? And why didn't the Syrian regime see it coming?
This happened 24 hours after the ceasefire agreement was reached in Lebanon. Many people don't see this as a coincidence that we see this move, because at that time, many of the Iranian proxies were massing in southern Syria. They were anticipating some sort of an Israeli offensive from the Golan towards the Bekaa through Syrian territories. So a lot of the Iranian proxies who have moved to the south, this emptied the way, cleared the way for the Syrian opposition forces in launching this surprise offensive and making these considerable gains. The regime don't seem able to hold them back. There are many people who are expecting to see Aleppo, the city, fall completely to the hands of the opposition, which something did not even happen during the time of the civil war, before the regime recaptured it in 2016.
And Aleppo is Syria's second largest city.
This is the second largest city. This is the commercial capital of Syria. This is the heartland. This is what many Syrians report to it as the green part of Syria. This is where a lot of the agriculture, the industry, the business, especially with Turkey, with the Kurdish areas. So it is a major setback for the regime to lose this Aleppo as a province, as well as the city itself.
And Aleppo, I mean, it's been quiet, hasn't it, for the last 8 years?
It's been quiet. I think the regime felt that it's all over for the opposition. They have them cornered in Idlib, the province of Idlib. They've been pounding them, the Russian Air Force, the Syrian Air Force. Every now and then they carry out few air raids here and there. And there was a sense that the regime felt that it was safe. The regime even went as far as letting go of many of the reserves, of the conscripts. He sent them home a few months ago, believing that it's all over. And they were not anticipating any major battles. And they saw these opposition forces as something that is on the retreat, and they will be fading away anytime soon.
One last question. The Iranian foreign minister has stressed continued support for the Syrian government in light of this offensive. Do they actually have the capacity, though, to support the government?
Well, this is part of a power struggle. Iran is trying to retain its control inside Syria. As we know, the Iranian regime played a big role in saving the regime. It sent a lot of its militias, it sent Hezbollah, and they're the ones who helped convince the Russians to come in, and they rescued the regime altogether. And now they have been vying for more power. Many see that now the Russians might not want the Iranians to stay in there to compete with them for control in the area. Also, Turkey has its own interest. Turkey has been trying to reach a deal with the regime that would take into consideration some political changes inside Syria. This definitely does not suit the Iranian side. So Iran now, they saw what happened in Gaza. They lost Hamas. We saw what happened in Lebanon, the degrading of Hezbollah's capabilities. And now a setback in Syria. Definitely it's not going for the Iranian regime, it is not going their way in the region now.
Thank you so much for your analysis. Al Arabiya's military expert, Riad Kahwaji.
Thank you.
To Russia now, and the country's defense minister, Andrei Belousov, has landed in North Korea to speak with military and political leaders. It's been reported that North Korea has sent more than 10,000 soldiers to fight for Russia recently, as well as allegedly providing them with military aid. It comes as Ukrainian officials reveal Russia has lost more than 2,000 troops over the past 24 hours. Let's get the latest from Moscow on this by talking to our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova. Hello again to you, Dasha. What is this meeting all about then? Has it happened? And what lines are coming out of it?
Well, indeed, a very interesting visit that we are seeing now by the Russian Defense Minister to the DPRK. Andrei Belousov has come there without any announcements being made prior, but that's yet another visit by the high-ranking Russian officials to the North Korean capital. We understand that Andrei Belousov has said that the relations between Moscow and Pyongyang are good neighborly relations which have trustful nature and partnership at its core. He also has said that there is a very important dialogue taking place between the leaders of the two countries, which is also beneficial for the continuation of these close ties. He also has stressed the importance of the signing of the comprehensive partnership agreement that has been negotiated by the two sides earlier this year, and said that this is going to play a very important role and sort of stabilizing factor for the stability of the region. He also has said that's going to become the factor of preventing the possibility of having more military conflicts in the area of the DPRK, and said that this is going to become one of the centerpieces of the entire Eurasian security. So certainly we understand that the two sides sides have a lot to discuss because the military cooperation is included into this strategic partnership agreement, and this is the area that has been also attracting the attention of the Western observers who have been talking and raising concerns about what this cooperation can actually entail.
How much help has North Korea provided Russia with so far? And actually, what reputation do North Korea's soldiers have on the battlefield?
Well, it's an interesting question that is really hard to answer because the Russian officials have neither denied or not confirmed the presence of the North Korean soldiers in Russia. There have been allegations from the Western media about the presence of those fighters in the area of the so-called special military operation, especially in the Kursk region, which has been under the parts of which have been under the Ukrainian control since August. And Russia has never said if that was actually the case with regards to those North Korean fighters being present there. However, what we have seen was the very accelerated pace of the Russian military over the course of the past months. We have seen the Russian armed forces saying that they have been making advances on the Donetsk direction. Also, we understand that there have been improvements when it comes to this Kursk region, with the Ukrainian troops, according to the Russian officials, being slowly but surely squeezed out from the Russian territory.
It has been claimed that Russia has seen the highest number of soldiers die in just one single day. Will that have any impact on Putin, do you think, when it comes to ending this war?
Well, it has been reported not by the Russian sources, so therefore it's not reported widely in the Russian Federation. So for the wider audience, what they have is the official statements from the Russian Ministry of Defense, which is not providing data of that sort. And therefore, in Russia, there is a very clear understanding, at least among the wider population, that there has been the inevitable need to start this operation in Ukraine. And therefore, at this moment, no matter whether people supported the launch of the operation at the very beginning or they oppose it, at this moment there is the wider consensus that Russia is not going to agree to any sort of freezing this conflict or get into the negotiating table when the positions of Russia are not taken into account. So these numbers are not quite going to reach the Russian audience or have any impact here domestically.
Dasha, Chernyshova in Moscow, thank you. To Ukraine, and 3 of the country's nuclear power plants have scaled back electricity production after Russia's attack on Kyiv's electrical grid yesterday. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Ukraine's energy infrastructure is extremely fragile and vulnerable, putting nuclear safety at great risk. It comes as President Zelensky spoke with Germany's Olaf Scholz today. That's despite criticising the country's Chancellor for a previous phone call with Vladimir Putin. Here's what he said on the 15th of November.
Chancellor Scholz told me he was going to call Putin. Olaf's call, in my opinion, is Pandora's box. Now there may be other conversations, other calls, just a lot of words. And this is exactly what Putin has long wanted. It is extremely important for him to weaken his isolation of Russia, and conduct talks as ordinary talks, which won't have any results, the way he did it for decades. It gave Russia a chance not to change anything in its policy, not to do anything real. It led to this war. We understand the challenges now. We know how to act. We would like to warn that there will be no new Minsk agreement. We need real peace. Glory to Ukraine. Chancellor Scholz told me he was going to call Putin. Olaf's call, in my opinion, is Pandora's box. Now there may be other conversations, other calls, just a lot of words. And this is exactly what Putin has long wanted. It is extremely important for him to weaken his isolation of Russia, and conduct talks as ordinary talks, which won't have any results, the way he did it for decades. It gave Russia a chance not to change anything in its policy, not to do anything real. It led to this war. We understand the challenges now. We know how to act. We would like to warn that there will be no new Minsk agreement. We need real peace. Glory to Ukraine.
Мінська 3 не буде. Нам потрібен реальний мир. Слава Україні!
Let's take a look at some of the stories making headlines today. Voters across Ireland have gone to the polls in the country's general election after a 3-week campaign. They're choosing who they want to serve as their next leader in the Dáil, that's the lower house of Ireland's parliament. Airlines and airports in India received 999 hoax bomb threats this year. That's according to the country's Deputy Civil Aviation Minister. That's 10 more than the previous year, with more than 500 received in the last 2 weeks of October, causing a disruption in services and flight schedules. And a list of no-go holiday destinations has been revealed today, with Barcelona and Bali on the list. Travel publication Fodor says tourism is placing unsustainable pressures on the land and local communities. To the United Kingdom now, and assisted dying could become law there after MPs voted convincingly in favour of the historic bill. It means adults who are terminally ill and given 6 months to live could request medical assistance to end their lives. It's a decision which has divided MPs throughout Westminster, including those who belong to the same political party. Here's what 2 of them had to say in Parliament a little earlier.
It's estimated that over 600 terminally ill people take their own lives every year. How can we allow this, but not a compassionate and humane assisted death? I have been astonished by the number of people who have been in touch with me to tell me about their terminally ill loved ones who have starved themselves to death. People talk about a slippery slope, but the Health and Social Care Select Committee found that not one jurisdiction which passed laws on the basis of terminal illness has expanded its scope. And none of the jurisdictions which have introduced... It's absolutely true. We are not talking about a choice between life or death. We are talking about giving dying people a choice of how to die.
My late mother lived with chronic illness all her life. And I knew that one day her pain would be too unbearable for her. But she did not let that limit her. She wanted to live. And I believe this bill would protect the wishes. This bill would not protect the wishes of people in her situation today. Because freedom in death is only possible if you have had freedom in life.
Let's go live to our correspondent, Olly Barratt in London. Hello to you, Olly. As we were seeing there, this vote, incredibly divisive, but actually the debate was very calm, it was respectful, there were so many personal stories, it was highly emotional.
It absolutely was, and Kim Leadbeater, who we heard from there and who was the MP that brought this legislation in the first place, says that she thinks it showed Parliament at its best. It was a respectful debate. It was very emotional at times. A lot of the parliamentarians that took part shared personal stories about mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, husbands, wives, or stories about constituents that they represent as well. And although there are very strong opinions on either side of the debate, the tone in the House of Commons was, for the most part, very respectful indeed, and sombre at times as well. We didn't know right up until the vote took place exactly which way it was going to go, because there were still quite a lot of parliamentarians that hadn't declared their view publicly. And so I think Kim Leadbeater will have been very pleased indeed with what ended up being a fairly comfortable majority of 50-odd members of Parliament when that vote finally took place.
Yeah, and I think it was the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, wasn't it? He actually voted in favour of this new law, but the bill does not become law yet. There are a few hurdles to clear. Just talk us through what happens next.
quite a few hurdles potentially to clear. Yes, there is the so-called committee stage, the report stage in Parliament. The MPs in the House of Commons get to scrutinise the legislation in its current form and also try and potentially suggest changes to it from its current form. It also has to go for scrutiny to the upper chamber, the House of Lords as well. There will be a series of votes. The MP that is leading this legislation, as I say, Kim Leadbeater, she thinks that we could be in the place of having a final vote on this legislation in 6 months or so from now. I think other MPs feel that's fairly optimistic. It could take even a year to get to that stage. It is entirely possible still that actually in the end the legislation could be voted down if MPs either change their mind or some of those who were minded to vote for it in principle at this stage but want to see changes if they don't feel that the changes that they would like to see are added to the legislation. So there's a long way to go before it becomes law. Even when it becomes law, there's probably a year or two after that before the government can work out exactly how to implement it, the training, the funding that the National Health Service might need to go ahead with this very controversial legislation. So we're probably at least 2 or 3 years away from this coming into effect if, as I say, and it remains an if, it does eventually pass through both chambers of the Houses of Parliament.
It's something, Olly, that campaigners have been working on for decades, including the terminally ill broadcaster Dame Esther Ranson. What has been her reaction tonight and the reaction of some others?
She's talked about being delighted. She's talked about her admiration for Kim Leadbeater, the Labour MP who has brought this legislation forward. You can imagine that opponents of the bill are saying that they're very disappointed, among them Danny Kruger MP, who effectively led the opposition in the House of Commons. He says now he will work to try and get this legislation changed. There are campaign groups and activist groups on either side of this debate who are saying similar things as well. It is very controversial, and we really did hear emotive arguments on either side. Kim Leadbeater's view is that there are enough safeguards in this legislation. She says that it is for adults who are terminally ill. You have to get the approval of 2 doctors to go ahead. You have to be of sound mental capacity yourself to make the request in the first place. There are lots of guardrails, she says, that can make sure that this is about helping terminally ill people right at the end of their lives. As I say, opponents of the legislation say that they don't feel there are enough safeguards in place. They worry about coercion of patients, and many MPs have also been saying they do have some concerns about exactly how much time lawmakers have had to scrutinise the legislation even to get to this point for this first vote today. So still controversial, still a long way to go, but certainly Kim Leadbeater and her supporters and the people who support this legislation say they're delighted in what is a historic moment for England and Wales. This is something that hasn't been debated in the House of Commons properly in terms of legislation for a decade, and supporters of the legislation felt that if it went against them today, it could have been another decade before they got a similar opportunity.
Thank you for talking us through it. Olly Barratt in London. Let's bring you the latest business news now. And Black Friday sales have been happening right around the world today, with shoppers grabbing bargains both in store and online. In the US, the National Retail Federation predicted shoppers would increase their spending this year, with sales of around $1 trillion. That's despite concerns about inflation and the cost of living. And Virgin Australia can start selling airline tickets for a new flight between Doha and 4 Australian cities after getting approval from the country's watchdog earlier today. 28 weekly return routes from Doha will now include Brisbane, Melbourne, Perth and Sydney. Turning to a bit of sports news, and the nominations are in for this year's FIFA Awards. Manchester City's Rodri and Erling Haaland are both up for gongs in the Best Male Player category, alongside Real Madrid's Jude Bellingham and Inter Miami's Lionel Messi. Manchester City manager Pep Guardiola is nominated for Coach of the Year. He won the same award in 2023. And the annual Emirates Dubai Sevens, the biggest sport and entertainment festival in the Middle East, has kicked off today. More than 5,000 athletes from around the world will take part in rugby, netball and cricket at the Sevens Stadium, with British rap singer Stormzy scheduled to take to the stage tomorrow night. French President Emmanuel Macron was in Paris today to get a first look inside the revamped Notre-Dame Cathedral ahead of its reopening next week. The iconic medieval building caught fire in 2019 and as a result the 19th century spire fell and the inside was badly damaged after 600 firefighters took 15 hours to put out the flames. 700 million euros has been spent on the renovations and the French president, his wife and the Archbishop of Paris were the first visitors earlier today. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Syria's opposition group reach Aleppo as they say they've taken control of towns and villages in the area. Russia's defense minister touches down in North Korea for talks with political leaders, cementing the two countries' military ties. The UK could legalise assisted dying after an historic vote by MPs. And President Macron is the guest of honour at Notre-Dame's Cathedral, which has been given a €700 million renovation following the devastating 2019 fire. That's just about it from us on W News. Thank you for joining us this Friday. Coming up next is the Riz Khan Show, and later, join Tom Burgess-Watson for GNT. From all of us here, a very good night.
Hello and welcome, I'm Riz Khan. 1 million dead or wounded. That's the figure reported by the Wall Street Journal as an estimate of the total number of casualties suffered by both sides on the battlefield during 1,000 days of war between Russia and Ukraine. Well, amid changes in the leadership of both the US government and the NATO military alliance, the milestone was reached at a time of uncertainty. In the days which followed, a spiral of escalatory claims and counterclaims fueled the fears of a global nuclear conflict. Russia has threatened to use its new hypersonic missiles against Ukrainian decision-making centers. A newly unleashed Ukraine continues to make use of American and European long-range missiles inside Russia. Both sides are now maneuvering for position ahead of January the 20th, when a new president, armed with his peace plan, enters the White House. And Donald Trump's appointment of his special envoy for Ukraine and Russia completes the team sheet of names that he wants to help him end the conflict. In this episode, I'll speak with influential voices from both Russia and Ukraine. But my first guest looks after military matters in the Baltic state of Latvia. Andrei is the defense minister of a nation that's a NATO member, whose government is a prominent voice in support of Ukraine and shares a border with Russia. And he's spoken in support of extending conscription for women in the years ahead. Minister, it's good to have you on the show. Let me start by asking, what is Latvia's response to the fast-moving developments in the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Yes, thank you for having me. What we see, of course, it is a continuous brutality of Russian forces. What we see also, of course, intimidation by Russian forces and by Russian posture. So, of course, it once more underlines importance of NATO, the Western community, global community supporting Ukraine. Because if we don't support Ukraine right now, the costs will be higher in the future.
Do you think the cycle of escalation has moved the world any closer to nuclear war than at any point in recent time?
We see escalation. We see additional blackmailing. We see additional nuclear rhetoric as well, I would say, unfortunately. Of course, it also demonstrates the fragility and challenges of the global security order. And also we see that there are authoritarian revisionist countries which are exactly using that kind of rhetoric. At the same time, I would not overestimate the scenario when nuclear Armageddon can take place. I still believe that there is some common sense. There is very clear signals also from NATO side. NATO is a nuclear alliance. Consequences would be extremely high, and I would say, first of all, extremely high for those countries and those authoritarian leaders which are using that kind of blackmailing.
The Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has said there's a real risk of global conflict, especially now that Iran and North Korea are more involved. Do you share this assessment, and what concern is there that Latvia could become a frontline, considering it shares a 300-kilometer border with Russia?
We see turmoil in the global security order. Of course, it concerns us. I think it concerns everyone who is interested in stability, who is interested in rules-based international order, in sovereignty of nations. So that's why, of course, there are a lot of concerns, what we see around the globe. And in those kind of circumstances, certainly some of the countries appear are willing somehow to become revisionist countries. And again, this is very unfortunate for all of us, and especially also for those revisionist countries themselves. As for Latvia, we are part of the most successful defensive alliance. It is not about security of Latvia, because we must remember Latvia is part of NATO, which means that security of Latvia is also security of NATO. There is one NATO. And in this regard, of course, we are all doing the necessary homework nationally, but of course also together with our international partners, our international allies within NATO alliance, which is defensive alliance, which is ready to defend, which is ready to deter, which is ready, of course, to support also the countries which fight for its freedom and rules-based international order.
Germany has drawn up a list of bunkers to protect its citizens in the case of any attack. Apart from NATO membership, as you were discussing, what steps has Latvia taken to help protect its citizens?
Well, we are ready for different kind of hybrid activities. We already see the hybrid warfare for some time, so this is nothing new for us. The weaponization of illegal migration, cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, incidents against critical infrastructure. But that's why, of course, we as society must be ready for different kind of scenarios. And I absolutely can underline, we are ready. We are ready in society, on societal level. We are ready among institutions. And of course, we cooperate closely with our allies, with also institutions from our partner countries. Of course, this is a important work which should be done nationally, but also in a joint effort to preclude from any kind of negative scenarios, any kind of sabotage and hybrid warfare activities from our adversaries.
Why did Latvia reintroduce military service for men last year, and what's been the response to your suggestion that women also might be conscripted at some point soon?
Yes, we reintroduced conscription. It was supported widely by society. We realize that if we discuss, and not only discuss, but if we implement comprehensive defense approach, everybody is involved in comprehensive defense approach. And this is also a position of our neighboring countries. We see conscription all around the region. And this actually also refers to the question of women. Women are part of course, part of the comprehensive defense. Every individual, every human being also in Latvia, of course, contributes to our defensive abilities. And we see example here in Sweden, Norway, Denmark recently also introduced compulsory service for women. So here, absolutely, we underline importance of comprehensive defense. I would say the Baltic-Nordic regional model, and also the, of course, equality of rights and responsibilities for all genders.
There is a fear among some in the Baltic states and other former Soviet nations that Russia is trying to create a split within each country between those citizens of Russian origin and the rest of the population, and even among politicians who are pro-Russian or anti-Russian. What chance is there Russia could create that kind of division in your country?
Well, of course, Russia can attempt and try different kind of means and measures to split and to divide. And I think this has been part of the Russian hybrid activities, again, for years. Of course, we are a democratic country, which means that there is diversity of opinions, diversity of political parties as well, and we are proud of it, that we have this diversity. At the same time, on the fundamental issues, sovereignty, freedom, democracy, supporting Ukraine, there is no split in Latvian society. Yes, there is some legacy of the Soviet Empire. Unfortunately, there are some minority groups within society which sometimes seems to be still living in the past. It could be acknowledged, but absolute wide majority among Latvia's population, including Russian-speaking population, are loyal, patriotic, supportive of NATO, supportive of course, of being a member of European Union, and also supporting Ukraine.
European officials are investigating what they believe is sabotage of underwater cables in the Baltic Sea, including a connection between Lithuania and Sweden and Finland and Germany. What information are you getting about this issue and what's being described as a hybrid warfare being waged by Russia against the West? What can you do to avoid something similar affecting Latvia?
There is hybrid warfare in the region. Absolutely, this is without any doubt. And Russia wages this hybrid warfare activity. I would be a bit more careful exactly specifically on this incident, because still some investigation must be completed to make specific already the conclusions. But yes, we are partly facing those challenges of defending, protecting our critical infrastructure. It's not easy. Let's be again straightforward, because we see cables hundreds of kilometers, and you cannot keep the warship above every cable, every place. This is, of course, also understandable. But additional monitoring, additional cooperation among institutions, additional flag appearance, also showing the NATO presence in the region. Also, of course, additionally adding warships and patrolling. This, of course, has been done and must be done. And of course, additional monitoring is certainly the key response to this.
I presume that's in response to Britain's warning that Russia is preparing to use cyber attacks on critical infrastructure against European nations supporting Ukraine in this conflict.
You are absolutely right. We've been facing cyber attacks again for years. 3 Baltic countries, if you look at some specific cyber attacks, 30%, almost 1/3 of cyber attacks against European Union, they are targeting exactly 3 Baltic countries. So we already built a strong wall of resilience against cyber attacks, but it is an ongoing process. It is ongoing homework to improve our resilience, to improve our reaction time, to improve our, in a sense, the wall against any such kind of detrimental activities by Russia. And it should be put straightforwardly, by Russia first of all.
Now, Minister, NATO's leading military officer, Admiral Rob Bauer, has warned European businesses that they have a role to play in preparing for a wartime scenario. Is that the case in Latvia too?
Yes, in Latvia, absolutely. We are much more ready, I guess, as some other countries, but I would still say the glass is half full rather than half empty. I think there is this understanding what takes place in Ukraine. It has a real dire and long-term consequences. That it means also adjustment and readjustment how we deal with Russia. So we cannot come back to any some kind of business as usual or business as previous. It also means that we need certainly to actively cooperate and enhance our military industry. Also, businesses have critical role to play here, and they are playing this role, including in Latvia. We are very strongly, of course, putting emphasis on our own military industry, which involves the business community. But it's not only about military industry, it's in general. So that, of course, we must reorient any connections with countries which can use economic tool as a political and strategic tool of intimidation and pressure. Of course, this should be taken care of.
Now, Minister, this week there was a fatal plane crash in your neighbour, Lithuania, and there are suspicions of Russian sabotage. What do you know about that?
Well, again, so there are specific investigation procedures. I would not rush with pre-assumptions or speculations on this. But of course, once more, it underlines how important it is to protect all domains of our life, be it in the sea, be it in the air. So it is once more underlining the importance of resilience, importance of readiness, importance of understanding what we are facing, that we should be ready for different scenarios, and also very importantly, that we should strongly communicate with our societies and explain as much as possible to keep the safety and security feeling always present, even though realizing that we live in quite insecure and challenging times.
Minister, I wonder what impact the potential threat from Russia has had on bolstering collaboration between European nations that share a border with Russia, such as yours.
Absolutely. It has bolstered cooperation. We've seen also, of course, and we very much welcome the NATO membership for Sweden and Finland, which means also that the region is much more strongly interconnected in terms of military, in terms of economic, political cooperation, even though it was strong already before. But common adversary or understanding of strategically common threat, it is always unifying countries. For all of us, being, in many ways on the front line with Russia means that we have to strengthen our defense lines. We should cooperate. We should build a shield on a border. We should defend every inch of NATO territory, and every inch of NATO territory starts exactly in our countries. And that's why also mutual cooperation among us is instrumental, very important, and is also developing.
Well, there's an unusual situation in your region, Minister, and that's the issue of the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad, a small territory on the Baltic, cut off from Russia, surrounded by Poland and Lithuania, and requiring access through Lithuania, Latvia or Belarus to reach the Russian border. And there have been tensions since Lithuania announced it would halt the transport of EU-sanctioned goods coming from Russia en route to Kaliningrad. What are the potential consequences of this move?
Well, of course, this should be still discussed. I guess it also once more underlines that Russia has its vulnerabilities. Naturally, Kaliningrad is also its, or Kaliningrad enclave or oblast region. It is a vulnerability also strategically for Russia. And it should be always reminded to Russia as well that also for Russia to somehow to have constructive relationships with its neighbors, it is in their long-term interests. So that's why, of course, it is also the Lithuania's decision. It is also, of course, a common decision within the European Union. But I believe that if Lithuania decides that there are security concerns and security risks due to this transit, then I would assume there is an absolute legitimate right to exactly make such kind of relevant decisions.
Now, Ukraine was recently given the green light by the United States, the UK and France to strike military targets further inside Russia. Was this a necessary step in your view?
It was necessary. We welcome that decision. Latvia, of course, also supports Ukraine strongly, once more also because of those reasons that this is about the long-term consequences for the global security, about rules-based international order. And if Ukrainian people are being hit by Russian rockets, by Russian missiles, and Ukraine cannot respond, of course, this is not a right situation. So we absolutely believe that this is the right for Ukraine to defend itself, defend itself against Russian aggression, to protect its people, and to destroy legitimate military targets, the basis from which those attacks against Ukrainian civilians are being targeted. So that's why, yes, Latvia supports it and welcomes, and actually invites even to do more and more speedily, with a more sense of urgency. This has been done, but it could have been done. That kind of decision could have been taken even earlier. Latvia itself, of course, supplies also Ukraine with weapons. It supplies also with training. Latvia is also co-leading with UK in a drone coalition, which is, of course, also very important in the new technology war. And we will be continuously supporting Ukraine with 0.25% from our GDP exactly for military expenditures, military support.
Well, now, Russia responded by using its new Oreshnik intermediary range hypersonic missile, and President Putin said that was a warning to the West. What message did you take from this?
This is a brutal intimidation. It is an intimidation by Russia. This is Russian traditional approach. If something is not according to Russia's plans, so it starts to intimidate its neighbors and starts to intimidate, let's say, other nations. So, of course, in this situation, this once more just underlines importance of Ukraine being allowed to target legitimate targets in Russia and supporting Ukraine constantly, because, well, intimidation must not be prevailing in international relations among sovereign nations.
Will these weapons systems have a significant impact on altering the current situation where Ukraine's been losing territory that it holds in Russia's Kursk region, while Russians have been steadily gaining ground in the east of the country?
Well, every day is decisive in Ukraine's fight for its freedom. And of course, let's not immediately fall into the traps that everything is going bad. Of course, we can realize that there are a lot of challenges and difficulties. There is sort of, if we may say, Russia's advantage to absolute disregard for human life, also disregard for its own soldiers' human life. But at the same time, exactly because of those reasons, because of that intimidation, Ukraine must be given all weapons to protect itself, also hitting legitimate targets on Russian soil.
Just a final thought, Minister. Eyes are turning to the USA, where the incoming Trump administration says it wants some kind of peace deal. And very recently, Michael Waltz, Donald Trump's nominee for National Security Advisor, said the war needs to come to a, quote, responsible end. And the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, has also said that he wants a fair deal. What do you think a responsible and fair deal looks like, and what compromises have to be made in order to reach it?
Exactly. All of us would like to see the peace in our region, and of course, not people dying because of some imperialistic ambitions. That's why we also welcome that there is, of course, aspiration for a deal. But once more, it is important that the deal has been achieved from positions of strength. So we must jointly speak and act from positions of strength. This is crucial. And as Volodymyr Zelensky, as President of Ukraine, has said, yes, exactly, it must be a fair and just deal, which means that it must be the deal defined above all also by Ukraine. It cannot be a deal which is imposed on Ukraine. So Ukrainian people fight for their freedoms. They've been supported, rightly so. They fight in many ways for freedom and values for all of us. And that's why, of course, this fair and just deal is above all defined by Ukrainian side. Liberating territories, the war criminals paying also, let us say, the responsibilities for what has been done. So, of course, this would be a fair deal for Ukrainian people. But above all, it is Ukrainian nation decides what is fair and just deal. So nothing should be made without also consent of Ukrainian.
Well, Minister Andrei Spruts, thank you very much for making the time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So how's all this being viewed from Moscow? Let's get a perspective from the Russian Member of Parliament, Evgeny Popov. He also presents the popular primetime current affairs show 60 Minutes that airs on the state-owned Russia One network. Evgeny, good to have you back on the show. Now, following the recent developments in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, both the green light given to Ukraine to strike inside Russia and, of course, the Kremlin's response with the use of new hypersonic missiles, how much closer is the world to nuclear war?
I thank you for giving me your floor, and I don't think we are pretty close to the full-scale nuclear war, because it's many steps away in forward on stair of escalation, and we just going up on the stair step by step to the nuclear war. But I don't think that we have that there are much insane politics in Europe and in the United States, which is want to be blown up in a nuclear war. And that's why I think we are closer to the negotiations than to the nuclear war.
I'll touch on that a little bit as the show goes on, but President Putin suggested the use of this new Oreshnik missile was a warning to the West. What do you think will happen if the West doesn't listen to this warning?
It's hard to say for me, because I'm not a guy from military Ministry of Defense, but I think it was important warning from Russia to any countries who thinks that we're not going to respond to the escalations. It was a signal to the West, to Washington, to London, to Paris, which is already using their missiles against historically Russian territory. it was hard signal, and I think it was it being heard in Western capitals, but I don't think that Ukraine and Washington will stop using the missiles again against our territory. But on every step which Washington or this lame duck administration will do, we have a response. But it's better for us to be on a table, on a table of negotiations rather than using new type of weapon.
Well, with someone of your senior position and contacts, I know you follow things closely and are party to a lot of information. I wonder, from that perspective, do you see such weapons being used to strike US bases in Poland or military targets on the French or British soil for their supplying of Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles if things escalate?
I think it depends on targets inside Russia territory. And I think it depends of, unfortunately, insane administration in Washington, D.C. right now. Of course, we can attack in response some Western military bases, but it would be historical decision, I would say, because right now we are already at war with NATO countries, with some part of NATO. We are at war with France, we are at war with Great Britain, and we are at war with the United States. Because they are using their missiles, long-range missiles, against our constitutional and historic territory. But I can't say you, would we use our long-range missiles against the Western military bases? If we will have no choice, of course we will do it. But I don't think what will be this step different with full-scale nuclear conflict, because it would be World War III, and World War III would be will be, of course, nuclear war, and no one will left on this planet, maybe. I don't know.
Evgeny, on your popular TV show, you've indicated a doomsday scenario to show how Russian nuclear weapons would be able to obliterate European cities and civilization with just a few missiles. And of course, Russian cities are also vulnerable to the same fate from Western nuclear weapons. Do people in Russia share Western fears of a nuclear escalation, or do they find reassurance in the nuclear deterrent?
You know, Russian people has just one goal: security guarantees, and we will get it on the battlefield or during negotiations. But right now, it's a dangerous phase of the conflict, because no, just a few red lines ahead, which is the West didn't cancel or didn't destroy. Of course, every people on this planet scared or afraid of nuclear war, because I'm sure that it will be no winner in any kind of nuclear conflict. That's why there is there aren't insane politicians in Russia which is wanted to use some nuclear missile against Western countries. But right now, we don't have other choice than respond mirror, like a mirror. If you use long-range missile against our territory, what should we do? It's a difficult question, and I don't know exact answer on it. But if the United States using a long-range missile, American long-range missile against our territory, should we use Russians long-range missiles against U.S. territory? If you thinking by logic, yes, we can use it, but I don't think it will happen in nearest future.
Well, you know, Evgeny, President Putin has threatened to use nuclear weapons on multiple occasions, but throughout the conflict. But some have dismissed these as empty threats and empty remarks because it would increase the risk of Armageddon for both sides. And why would any world leader choose to inflict that on his own people?
You know, Riz, I would ask you, don't live in a world of myths. President Putin never threatened to anybody with a nuclear weapon. We've never threatened to use our nuclear weapon against any countries. We have a doctrine which is allow us to use our nuclear weapon in response of using nuclear weapon against our territory. Or if we have huge threat to our sovereignty, to our freedoms, to our state, that's it. We can't threat anybody to use a nuclear weapon first, you know? And that's why it's a hard decision, and we're thinking for a long time how to respond, because it's so dangerous right now. We are really live in the most dangerous time ever, I think. It's more dangerous than Caribbean crisis. It's more dangerous than I don't know, World War I.
Right. You know, Evgeny, you make an interesting point about the use of language, and you know, the word escalation is being used by both sides to justify new developments in the war. Now, President Putin described America's permission to use longer-distance missiles as an escalation, which justifies, of course, his response in changing nuclear protocols and firing the hypersonic missile. But then the West has cited Russia's attacks on civilian infrastructure, its use of Iranian drones, North Korean missiles, and now thousands of North Korean troops as examples of escalation by Russia. So is the idea of escalation now meaningless when it's being used like this?
In my head, there is no idea of escalation. I think we should get security guarantees for Russia and the Russian people as soon as possible, again, on the battlefield or during the negotiations. Of course, right now we can see some recklessness decisions by Biden's administration, which is 2 months left in the White House. But if we're talking about escalation, follow some decisions. Mr. Biden told us that he is allowed to use long-range missiles, American long-range missiles, in response of North Korean soldiers in Kursk region. But would you tell me who saw North Korean soldiers in Kursk region? Even Pentagon doubt about those soldiers exist on our soil. I've been in the Kursk region a few days ago. I didn't see any Koreans, North Koreans, and South Koreans as well. No logic, no North Korean soldiers in Kursk region, but Biden allowed to use long-range missiles against our territory. Then we use new hypersonic missile, just one new hypersonic missile, which is, of course, high technology, and it was with no new nuke, without nuclear weapon, without nuclear warheads. We used it not against civilian infrastructure. It was used against military infrastructure, against a military plant, Yuzhmash. That's why we just, in the place of responding, we are responding on Western insane decisions.
I understood, yeah.
We are not running ahead of the West on this stair of escalations.
Understood, Evgeny. I just want to confirm. So I know you say you haven't seen North Korean soldiers, but are you saying they definitely haven't been used by on behalf of Russia?
I don't know. It's a myth. We don't have any confirmation from our military of defense. We don't have any confirmations from our war correspondents. We don't have any confirmation from locals. Try to hide 10,000 people in any territory. You can't do it. You couldn't do it. Nobody found it. Nobody saw it. It's like a myth for me. But the main point is that we don't need North Korean soldiers right now. We have enough recruits. Enough. We have more soldiers than Ukrainians has right now. It was a different situation just a year ago. I didn't know for what reason we need North Koreans.
Well, I was going to say, the Financial Times has reported that Yemen's Houthis are also recruiting mercenaries to fight on behalf of Russia. NATO, the US, and the West is reporting that there are killed North Korean soldiers on the battlefield as well. That's why, of course, that story has come out. Now, political and military leaders in the West are desperately trying to anticipate what Donald Trump might do. Do you think the Kremlin actually knows what his plan is? And do you know whether or not President Putin and President-elect Trump have actually spoken since the election?
It was clear from Kremlin administration that we don't have any. We didn't have any call and negotiations between Trump and Putin after he was elected as president. No way. And we don't have. I don't have any information about his plans. I have heard his promise that he will finish this conflict during 24 he will finish this conflict during 24 hours. But I'm not sure he can do it. And don't overestimate the United States. They can't do less than they promise for last for many years.
You know,
and,
Evgeny, just to put it into perspective, thanks, but you know, putting it in perspective, Donald Trump's nominee for National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz, suggested just recently that the incoming administration wishes to bring this war to a responsible end. Now, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky himself also said what he wants is a fair peace deal. So what does a fair peace deal look like from a Russian perspective?
We have official Kremlin position about this, and we have heard Putin in Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the end of the summer. It was clear that we need security guarantees for Russia and the Russian people. We need to get all our constitutional territories, and we need to get guarantees from the West that Ukraine will not be in NATO alliance.
You know, it's interesting when you look at the two key players on both sides now. President-elect Trump is known as a deal maker who only wants to win. President Putin is known as an equally tough negotiator who doesn't want to lose. So when it comes to striking a peace deal regarding Ukraine, who's going to come out on top? Who wins such a battle? Why?
Our soldiers will win this war and this battle, because if you look on the battlefield, you will see that we're going forward every day, and we capture villages, new villages every day. And now time is on our side, of course, and we will destroy Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian army in our Kursk region, I hope very soon, until New Year. And I don't believe at any deal which possible in the next few months. Me personally, maybe it's possible, but I can't find any conditions which we will agree, except those I told you a minute ago. Right. We have to get our territories. We have to get security guarantees, and we have to get no NATO Ukraine.
Okay, so, you know, I want to get your perspective, Evgeny, on something that's in the news at the moment. The Russian state news agency TASS quotes a military source as saying what they call a UK mercenary who's been taken prisoner in the Kursk area of Russia, part of which, of course, Ukraine has held since launching that surprise offensive in August. Now, that mercenary has been named as 22-year-old James Scott Rees-Anderson. From your perspective, what kind of punishment does he face in Russia if he is charged?
No, it's years of prison, and he's not first and he's not last. He will be lucky if he will be subject of exchange. It will be the best for him to be exchanged on our guys who've been captured by Ukrainians. But dozens UK citizens were captured by our army during this conflict. US citizens, Colombian citizens, guys from most of the Western and America's countries. That's nothing new on this news. But what's new? He was first who've been captured in our historical territories. We captured him in Kursk region, That is new, but we've seen before a lot of foreigners which been captured by our army.
Evgeny, as we wrap up, I have to ask you, after Donald Trump won the election, why did your TV show run a segment that purported to congratulate his wife Melania's return to the White House by showing a series of nude and semi-naked pictures of her? You look like you were having fun with it, but was that designed to humiliate the president-elect, and isn't there a risk of provoking him?
We're doing news for Russians and for Russian-speaking people. And of course, Melania is a respectable woman. He didn't do any bad for Russians, and she's beautiful. Why shouldn't we show her? We got those pictures from open sources, from old magazines. It's the usual work for journalists to show what we have.
Well, I appreciate you joining us, Evgeny, and I'm looking forward to having a chance to chat with you as, of course, the story develops. Evgeny Popov, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Well, my final guest today is the Ukrainian Member of Parliament, Oleksiy Goncharenko. His father was the mayor of Odessa, one of the cities that has come under intense Russian bombardment in recent days. I wanted to get his take on the mood in Ukraine in light of recent escalations, and also his reaction to Donald Trump's choice of special envoy for Ukraine. Oleksiy Goncharenko, thank you for joining the show. Now, I'll start by asking you, what do you make of President-elect Donald Trump's choice of the retired General Keith Kellogg as his special envoy to end the Ukraine-Russia conflict?
Yeah, I think this is a very good choice. I welcome this choice, and from all options, I think this is a very strong choice. General Kellogg, first of all, is a very experienced person. Secondly, he is in the context, and he is strong and hawkish on Iran, on China, on Russia, and that is good because all these axis of powers, which includes these countries, they understand only language of strength. And I think that General Kellogg is capable for this.
Now, when it comes to the new administration, we know now Donald Trump's picks for Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, National Security. Does that group present a more or less hopeful prospect than many feared during the election campaign when J.D. Vance said he didn't care what happened to Ukraine?
You know, for me, it's more optimistic because all the people you mentioned, especially Senator Rubio, whom I know personally, really strong and very good. And next, National Security Advisor Waltz, also very good. So I think it shows that these people are strong and that President-elect Trump is trying to take the best possible people. And I think that they can do a very good job.
Well, Mr. Goncharenko, how should Donald Trump approach negotiations with President Vladimir Putin, and how should President Zelensky approach talks with either of them?
I will allow myself to give some advices just because I really know what Russia is. And the main advice is to be strong. Peace through strength. That's the only way, because Putin does not understand anything else in the world. Anything else. The second thing, don't believe Putin. When Putin is saying something, it means nothing. That's you need to remember. And the third advice is not to believe and not to follow Russian bluffing, because there will be a lot of bluffing and chantage that should not scare American representatives, and I hope it will not.
Considering what you just said, sir, what would an acceptable peace deal look like to Ukraine then?
What is the best peace deal for us is complete, full restoration of Ukrainian territorial integrity, and by this, restoration of international law and international order. How it will be in practice, I don't know. But next thing, which is so important, is the security guarantees, because we want really peace and not a ceasefire. And only security guarantees can prevent Russia from new invasion. So that is very, very important.
Well, Russia seems to be advancing on the battlefield faster than in past months. Are you worried that the battle lines could change in Russia's favor before any ceasefire takes place?
Yeah, it can happen. The Russians are advancing. We can't say that there is no blitzkrieg, there is no breakthrough from Russians, but it's a kind of advancing in the style of the First World War, just taking some trench after trench, 100 meters after 100 meters. Yeah, it's painful for us, it's our land, but it looks like they are advancing, and for the moment, we can't stop them. For this, we need more weaponry now, and I hope we will receive it. This will help us enormously. More air defense, more air long-range capabilities, and more sanctions against Russia, because the only thing which gives them possibility to continue to advance is that their war chest is full. And more sanctions, especially against oil and gas, that is something we're looking for. And here, President-elect Donald Trump has a very good position from my point of view. As he said, I will drill, drill, drill. And that will lead to that will definitely influence the oil prices, which will definitely influence Russia.
Well, on our previous guest on this episode, the Russian MP and TV host Evgeny Popov, told me there's no evidence that North Korean troops are supporting Russian forces in Kursk, as has been reported. Have you seen any evidence of their involvement?
In this case, I would like to ask what they're doing in Kursk region. So you see, even Russian so-called MP, because they don't have a parliament, it's not their way of their country, they're not democracy, so they just have something which they call the parliament. But even him, and he is quite famous Russian propagandist, even him is not arguing that North Koreans are in Kursk region. And you can open the map of the world and ask yourself what North Koreans are doing in thousands and thousands and thousands of miles and kilometers from their home.
Well, either way, with or without North Korean reinforcements, could Ukrainian forces withstand a substantial counterattack? And how important is that region as a bargaining chip in future negotiations?
It is important, and we are fighting there, trying to keep the lines. We will see how it will develop. In any way, Russians need to pay a lot of attention to this region, which is also good for us, which diminishes their possibility to pay attention to Ukrainian regions under attack. So we will see. It's the war. It's very hard to predict anything in the war.
Mr. Goncharenko, how much difference are long-range missiles making? And is it potentially too little, too late?
For the moment, it is too little, too late, but in any way, we welcome it and we are thankful for this. And we hope that more will arrive. They are making difference, and they can make much bigger difference if we will receive these missiles in a big number.
Now, one thing the former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has done, he's accused European leaders and the new Labour government in Britain of failing to do enough to make their continued support for Ukraine clear. Does he have a point? Do Ukrainians feel let down?
No. Well, about British government, we don't have any question. British government is supportive, like it was in the time of Prime Minister Johnson, which I'm very thankful for him, especially the first months of invasion. His role was really great in uniting the world for supporting Ukraine. But then all other prime ministers, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, now Keir Starmer, they're doing a great job. United Kingdom is a real partner and real friend. But we need to remember that it's not a charity from the United Kingdom, but fulfilling of their responsibilities. In 1994, in December, so exactly 30 years ago, it was United Kingdom and the United States which made Ukraine to give up our nuclear weaponry to Russia. And they gave us security guarantees in the form of Budapest Memorandum, which is now we can only laugh on this because it happens that it's not a guarantee. But in any way, United Kingdom and the United States, they have a responsibility to help Ukraine in the situation we are. Because if not their influence 30 years ago, and if Ukraine would have nuclear weaponry that we had, never, ever what had happened with us would not happen.
Well, Boris Johnson also surprised a few people when he likened President Putin to Adolf Hitler and President Zelensky to Winston Churchill. Do you think that's a fair analogy?
The first part definitely is. The second, only history can give the answers. So I can tell you that it's not about just President Zelensky. It's about Ukrainian people and the fight of Ukrainian people that made also Zelensky as a representative of Ukrainian people really famous. But what is historical is not just one personality, which is President Zelensky. Again, we will finally estimate him later, but Ukrainian people and our will for freedom. And I think this is unprecedented.
As things have escalated, President Putin has talked about using his new Oreshnik hypersonic missiles to strike what he calls Ukraine's decision-making centers. What do you think he means by that, and how seriously are you taking such threats?
Now we see the big campaign by Putin, campaign of blackmailing and threatening of the world with these Oreshnik missiles. In reality, nobody knows how effective it was. I can tell you where Oreshnik strike happened, there is no big result. What does it mean? I don't know how effective really it is. Secondly, how many these Oreshnik missiles really Russia has? We also don't know this. So it looks more like a bluffing from Putin. And in any way, I want to tell you, we're not afraid of his threats, because we know with whom we deal. This is existential for us, and Russia is already using everything they can against us. So if they would have everything they have, except nukes, they're using. And the only reason they're not using nukes, because it will be a physical end for themselves, and for Putin included. That's why they're not using it.
Well, sir, give us some idea what effect the latest Russian attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure has had on civilian life as winter approaches. And is this a marked escalation or simply a continuation of Russia's ongoing strategy?
It's continuation. They started this 2 years ago. It will be already the third winter like this. Russians, that is a Russian war playbook, their warfare style, to terrorize civilians, to make them suffer, to make their life unbearable. That's what they're doing. And they did it, something like this in Syria, in order to cause the migration waves. They did it in many other places before. So they continue this brutal style. What are the results? Millions of Ukrainians are without electricity today. There are problems with heating, with water supply. Yeah, but it's nothing new for us. That's something which happens already for the third winter.
Well, on the point of strategy, we've been hearing reports and claims that Russia's also been involved in a kind of hybrid warfare involving sabotage and cyber attacks. The Kremlin has denied such strategy, but what's your understanding of the situation?
What to deny? Russia is making hybrid attacks, sabotage attacks, terroristic attacks throughout the whole world, especially in Europe. Salisbury, where they used chemical weapons, or DHL airplane, which falls in Vilnius in Lithuania just days ago, after there were information from European intelligence that Russia is going to attack DHL flights, all their attacks against depots, all their cyber attacks, all their attacks against infrastructure like cables, like internet, and so on and so on. So Russia is conducting a full-scale hybrid war against the civilized world.
Well, final thought, Mr. Goncharenko. What's your response to the popular podcaster Joe Rogan's derogatory comments about President Zelensky and Joe Biden, accusing them of escalating the conflict to a point that could trigger a nuclear world war?
I want to invite Mr. Rogan to Ukraine. I want to show him what's happening there on the ground. And I think in this case, his thoughts and his views will change significantly. So if you want to comment something, it's very good to know about this a little bit more than just to read something in media, especially in Russian media.
Well, Alexei Goncharenko, thank you very much for giving us a perspective on the show.
Thank you.
And that's all for this episode of the show. I'm Riz Khan. From me and the team, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Honolulu, a journey that'll give you history, food trips, and adventure. But more than anything, Honolulu offers you nature at its best. One of the most famous is Waikiki, the beachfront neighborhood of Honolulu and the most touristy area in town. Occupying a long stretch of the coast on the south shore of Honolulu, Waikiki's got a strip of high-rise hotels and resorts lining the beach. Other famous spots on the historical side include the Lolani Palace, a historical landmark in downtown Honolulu, originally built in 1879. Pearl Harbor is also considered a memorial attraction in Honolulu. Meanwhile, the local Hawaiian cuisine is certainly a thing to try. Then there's a Honolulu's Chinatown for fresh produce. The busy market section of Honolulu smells of fresh fruits and veggies and meat and fish. Here you can buy produce at great prices. And finally, here are Honolulu's well-known nature trips. The Hanayuma Bay is one of the most famous places on the entire island for snorkeling. It's a nature reserve and marine sanctuary. Hiking is one of the best things to do in Honolulu. There are quite a few good hikes right in the Honolulu area. Some of them a bit outside of the city limits, but others are just right in the city. Take your pick. Then, of course, there's the Diamond Head, which is the iconic former volcano that's an emblem of travelers visiting Honolulu. People often like to take photos with it as a backdrop, but the view is in fact so much better when you're on top of it. Then, there's the Manoa Falls that offers a lush green jungle hike. It's a good way to appreciate the greenery and plants and trees of Hawaii. The north shore of Oahu is also great for surfing, or try the bodyboard, stand-up paddleboard, and other ocean activities. And then there's the Honolulu Zoo that's home to 905 different animals. Along with the diversity of different animals at the Honolulu Zoo, also neatly designed with many different lush tropical gardens. And finally, the Waikiki Aquarium is a good place to learn about the marine life of Hawaii.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burgess-Wilson, and today we're going to take a look back at some of the highlights from our show during the course of the past week. Now, just to remind you, on the 23rd of November 2006, the former KGB agent Alexander Litvinenko was poisoned by a cup of tea at a London hotel. Well, on his deathbed, he blamed the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Well, Litvinenko, who had worked for the Soviet KGB and its successor, the FSB, fell out of favor with the Russian authorities after allegedly refusing to kill the oligarch Boris Berezovsky. Well, arrested multiple times, he fled Moscow in the year 2000 and sought asylum in the United Kingdom, where he became one of Putin's most vocal critics. Well, the 18th anniversary of his death was marked during the course of the weekend. We can cross now to London and speak to Marina Litvinenko, the widow of Alexander Litvinenko, who was killed almost exactly 18 years ago. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been 18 years since your husband was killed. Just tell us, first of all, how did you mark that anniversary?
You said it's 18 years since my husband was killed here in London, and I think it was mostly one of the first serious attack outside of Russia and killing enemies or oppositioner of Putin. But now in 18 years, we have more and more people who've been killed or died because they've been against of Vladimir Putin. This was a very quiet day for two of us, for me and for our son, Anatoly. And we went to cemetery and just tried to remember my husband and his father as a very good man. And I can't believe it's soon almost 20 years since he died.
Indeed, it doesn't feel like so very long ago that we were covering that story in the media. Of course, you live in London and you continue to speak out against President Vladimir Putin, whom your husband blamed for his death before he actually died from his poisoning. Just tell us a little bit about the sort of activities and the kind of activism you're engaged in.
It was even not activism. I think it was my right to understand who killed my husband. And it was not possible to bring this case to the proper court because people who was named as a first suspect were in Russia. And Putin immediately refused to extradite them to UK. And of course, they didn't want to go themselves. And only way was to bring this case to inquest or to public inquiry. And it did happen in 10 years after my husband, Alexander Litvinenko, was killed in 2015. And only in 2016, we had a verdict. It means all these 10 years, I didn't feel myself as an activist, but as a person who fight the truth and to understand how president of a big country as Russia might be a criminal. He was pointed in a public inquiry report. He was not named as a person who killed my husband, but he's definitely responsible for my husband's death and for use of radioactive material, polonium-210. And it's not a proper, maybe, verdict, but one day after what Putin done during this almost 25 years being as a head of Russia, this will be one part of this huge case against Vladimir Putin.
And before he was poisoned, your husband said that Putin will start a war, millions of people will die, he said. He also said words to the effect that this monster, talking about Vladimir Putin, must be stopped. I'm just wondering what it was about that angered Moscow so much and what you think he envisaged happening as the years went by.
It was a lot of things what might or irritated or became angry with my husband. But Sasha, my husband, always said, this is people that are criminals. They not care about state. they don't care about people in Russia. They mostly care about money and power and controlling this criminal business. And if you started to do something what this business might be cut or compromise, they might kill you. And this is exactly what happened to any other people as my husband, Alexander Litvinenko, when they tried to stop. I can't call this as even corruption. This was like an international crime. They tried to corrupt people all around the world. And this is, we see what is happening now during this war against Ukraine. How is this everything difficult? And knowledge of my husband as a former security officer was very important here in UK or in Europe to explain this. And I think it became as a very special point why he was killed at the end.
And obviously predicting a war in which millions of people were killed, which were the words that your husband used before he was died. Do you think he envisaged that the day that would come, that the situation we're in now, that there would be a war between Russia and Ukraine involving the West to a significant degree?
It's very difficult to make any prognosis. Only things what I always try to say, Putin tried to bring as many countries involved in this situation. And countries as the United States, United Kingdom, and European Union, they just too long waiting for reaction. If it's all happened in 2022, when Putin just started this war and stopped him and provide all weapons what Ukraine was needed, it would be finished much sooner. And not so many people might died, and so many children might died. And now we can see how more and more people dying in this war. And this situation would be worse if, again, European countries and United States will started to calm down Putin or trust him for what he is saying. Putin must be stopped. And Ukraine, what is fighting already for almost 3 years, need to be supported, and it's not going to be any third world war if it will be finished sooner as possible.
But of course, the Biden administration and it seems the United Kingdom as well have given Ukraine permission to use some very significant weaponry in the last couple of weeks. And that's obviously angered Russia. President Putin has issued some pretty chilling warnings about where things could head to from here. How seriously do you think we should take those warnings?
But this was from a very beginning. When this war started, Putin tried to frighten all leaders, saying it's my game. I'm fighting against Ukrainian Nazis, how he called them. But of course, we know it was not any Nazis. And he already said you might use nuclear weapon because we already developed a lot of new missiles, but it never happened. Even after Ukrainian army just went to Russian territory and now almost 3 months staying in this part of Russia. And this has never happened. Why now you have to believe Putin will use this nuclear weapon after what never happened before? I think, he tried to push leaders, he tried to push ordinary people and make them feel frightening to say this because his own situation is not perfect. Russian economy was not prepared for this long war. They might do this for a few months, maybe for 1 year, but even they try to change economy to military type, again, it doesn't work properly. Why they always need a new people or soldiers from, now we know, from North Korea, some of them from Africa, because they don't have enough people in a front line first, and they don't have enough people working in the factories. And this is a real situation of Russia. And for Putin, it's better maybe to stop this war, but in a position what suits him. He doesn't want to give up territory what he already occupied. He even wants to take a bigger part, and he needs to present to all Russian people inside of Russia it's his victory. And to make this, he needs to stop UK, United States, France to supply Ukraine with these weapons.
So is that how you see things heading to from here? Do you think a negotiated settlement is the most likely way forward for Ukraine? And I also want to ask you what you think the advent of Donald Trump on the scene would mean for such a negotiated settlement.
Again, I would be the last person who will try to predict what Donald Trump will do, because it's, of course, his decision might be last, but it's every time depending to his advisors. And we need to see who's around him and what kind of advice he might receive. And he obviously less politician, but more businessman. And he will calculate what's the way would be more profited for him. And this is all my answers for now. We don't know what situation might be preferent for Donald Trump.
You've said that President Putin wants to sow fear and disunity amongst Ukraine's allies. How much success do you think he's having in this regard?
Again, from very beginning, it was not real allies. It was not real consolidation of countries against this war. And this is what was not happened. This was supposed to be finished just in a few months after this all consolidation. This is always calculation. How long Ukraine will survive, or Putin will use nuclear weapon or not. And this is always delayed. But this is exactly what Putin wanted. It's his always strategy to make people or countries to be against each other, not doing work together. And now, actually, we have another very serious situation. We can call this like a proxy war. And he used some, of course, not Putin personal, but the system tried to use a different type of destabilization in the different countries. No, for example, today morning, we have an aircraft in Lithuania, in the Baltic countries, collapse. This was business jet, DHL. But you know, a similar situation happened in UK, but not with a jet, but with some office, when again, DHL was under, I would say, attack, because parcel was just exploded. And we still don't know what happened with this jet, this DHL in Vilnius. And this is all strategy, what Putin's system tried to use against civilization, to feel people insecure, unsafe. And what I say, consolidation and union of this country against Putin as an evil. I don't have another word about him, how he all doing now against all world, just to stop.
Yeah, and of course we've had the head of MI5 in the United Kingdom, the domestic intelligence agency, saying that Putin's henchmen, he says, want to cause chaos on the streets of the UK and of Europe. I mean, do you think that's something that can and will really happen?
No, it did happen, and we have some already result and hackers attack and some Russian hackers behind of this. What I said happened to DHL, and even hooligans. They might be locals, but they would be used by this Russian security service to destabilize this situation. Even provocative involvement to different meetings of protest. Again, this might be some trace of Russian security service. And this is, we're allowed to do this. It's like an illness. If you don't have a very strong treatment, immediate, maybe very, again, what I said, strong, illness will not finish. Everything what we're doing, we just a small portion, but not enough to treat this illness. Because Putin is a real illness. Because what I see now, it's like a metastase. If you don't treat cancer properly, you have a metastase in your whole body. And what he tried to do now.
What is the state of the opposition in Russia today? Because, of course, Alexei Navalny died earlier this year. Is there anything left of the opposition?
Alexei Navalny was definitely the most prominent and powerful oppositioner, but not alone. He was just the most, what I said, well-known. But opposition in Russia was destroyed many years ago. And we never, since beginning Putin in the power, we didn't have a proper opposition presenting in a parliament. This opposition might make any change. We can call this system opposition. Any other opposition was not system. They could go for protest in the streets. They might try to be elected to the local, to council or some parliaments of towns or cities, but not a bigger result opposition could achieve being in Russia. And particularly after war started in 2014, I would like to mention, with the Crimea invasion and all this activity in the east of Ukraine, Putin started to squeeze opposition more and more. And any change to do in Russia was not possible. Some people escaped, some people been arrested, some people been killed, as Alexei Navalny. This is what we all say about opposition. And now I believe any person who against the war, who disagree with what Putin is doing, it's opposition. And if you still be a normal and not supporting this war, you might be this power. And now it looks like to be Russian and save your normality, it means opposition now.
The only other person in the world who probably understands the situation that you've been through, the pain you've been through, the only other parallel I can think of is Yulia Navalnaya, the widow of Alexei Navalny. And I'm just wondering whether you've maintained contact with her and whether you see her having a role going forward and really carrying on the work of her husband.
This is a lot of similarity and difference. Of course, I feel so sorry for Yulia Navalny, who was very supportive to her husband, but I don't think she ever expected to be a leader of opposition. I still don't know if it's her choice or she could not say no to all supporters of Alexei Navalny. But it means she's very brave, because it's not so long since Alexei Navalny died, and her decision was almost immediate to start this new position. And again, for what I could say, it's just I wish her success, and if she would be able to consolidate people around her. But again, I don't think we all need to find any leader. You have to keep these all right things inside of you and doing even little things, but what might change something in the future. But for young people, maybe it's very important to consolidate around somebody. If there's any activities, as for example was a march of peace in Berlin and on 17th of November, again, is good. If people might find somebody who is a similar or believes to similar things, it's okay, it's good, it's right.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there because we're out of time, but I really want to thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Marina Litvinenko. Thank you.
Thank you.
The US President-elect Donald Trump is pledging big tariffs on the United States' three largest trading partners, namely Canada, Mexico and China, where he plans to impose a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico until they clamp down on drugs and migration. Well, Beijing has responded, saying that they remain open to dialogue with the United States. Canada, meanwhile, says it is, quote, essential to the US energy supply. Well, for more, we're joined now by the Canadian-American businessman and Shark Tank investor Kevin O'Leary. Thank you very much indeed for being with us once again here on Al Arabiya News. I'm assuming you're not particularly surprised because on the campaign trail, after all, Donald Trump said that his favourite word in the English language was none other than tariffs.
I'm not surprised, actually. Security at the border is not just a Mexican-U.S. issue. It's a Canadian-U.S. issue. And for a long time in previous administrations, going back as far as the NORAD agreements, the U.S. has wanted Canada to pay its fair share, as they like to say, to secure the northern border against what was once the USSR and now Russia. So they concern themselves with tying that up. Now, in Trump's case, these tariffs are all about pre-inauguration negotiation, right? Even with NATO, just visited Miami Beach recently. All of this is positioning towards what's going to be the negotiation between Canada and the U.S. around the Mexican-Canadian deal. It's an extension of NAFTA. Most people remember it as that, but this will be the third time it's negotiated. And this is a starting position. What complicates the situation right now is Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, had a 2-hour conversation last night with Trump. However, he's on his way out. Trudeau probably isn't going to last another 7 or 8 months. And so, unfortunately, the parliamentary system is not quite like the U.S. The end game for a prime minister that's losing a majority mandate is they just throw him out. You saw it happen in England just a few months ago. It's going to happen in Canada. And the real negotiation is going to be with the head of the Conservative Party, a man named Pierre Poilievre, who's currently a private citizen, represents the opposition, but he's the person that will take on this responsibility by the time these negotiations start and Trump is president. So it's a very delicate situation. Obviously, there's no way you can put 25% tariffs on a partner like Canada, where all the food and energy and electricity and gas and oil and paper and minerals and all that stuff flow into the U.S. And so all of this is just a pre-positioning, and it's not a big surprise to anybody. It's just this unique situation where Trudeau is lame duck and the new prime minister is not there yet.
Okay, so that's the situation in Canada. And of course, Canada sounding extremely alarmed by the idea of a 25% tariff, saying it will have a devastating impact on workers and jobs. But it's not just in Canada that it would have a devastating impact on workers and jobs. It would also have a devastating impact on workers in the United States, wouldn't it?
Yes. You know, you have to think about all of this as not a sales tax, not a burden on the American economy at all. The real issue here, you know, sort of the 1,000-pound gorilla in the room, is not Canada or Mexico or even the European countries. It's China. The U.S., in fact, Europe, I'd argue, is in an economic war with China and has been since 1999, when they came into the WTO making all these promises about playing by the rules, and they've never done that. And so IP theft, cheating, stealing, dumping of commodities in various markets, all of this has come to a head. And during the Biden administration, you know, they didn't take off the tariffs against China. It's just that Trump is now ratcheting it up to get them to the table. Most tariff deals are reciprocal. That's what the agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico is. It's a reciprocal tariff agreement. Same with Germany on automotives at 10%. But this China thing is going to DEFCON 1. It's getting really, really extreme. And I expect, rather than risk trade with the U.S., the supreme leader, who only gets to remain supreme if everybody's employed in China, will get over to the U.S. and try and work something out. And that's because Trump is just making it so difficult. And I don't think it's really going to affect the U.S. economy. There hasn't been much effect on tariffs at all. We've had a very strong economy at the consumer level, stock markets at all-time high. It was a lot of political rhetoric. The tariffs would ruin the economy. It just hasn't happened. And now we're going into the end game, or the beginning of the game, depending on which way you want to look at it. But I expect that this will really be all about China and will not have that much effect on the American economy.
So how come China got away with it seemingly lightly with a 10% hike in tariffs, when in fact Donald Trump had talked on the campaign trail about something a bit more like 60%, hadn't he?
I mean, the whole presidential election is over and the country's operating as if Trump is already president. You don't see a lot of foreign leaders going to Washington. They're all showing up in Mar-a-Lago right now. So we only have 54 days left. We're going through a holiday season here in the U.S. Trump has almost picked his entire cabinet. I mean, it's incredible at the pace at which he's done this. And most people like the picks. There's a couple of controversial ones, but Trump knows he only has 24 months in which he has a majority mandate, because there are going to be midterm elections, and usually the House flips then, and you don't have as much power. So he's going to try and ram all this stuff through in the next 2 years, and he's got a mandate. He won an incredible, no other way to describe it than a landslide. I mean, he decimated the Democrats in every swing state and then some, and even won the popular vote. So he's not waiting around to debate anything with the White House or any Democrats. He's just firing up the engines, and he's going to plow right on through town.
The reason given for singling out China relates to the drug fentanyl. And I just want to ask you whether you think that's first of all, is that the real reason? And then I also want to ask you, as an extension of that question, why this is such a serious issue in the United States?
Well, fentanyl has been an issue. Opioid addiction, huge issue. Porous border, Mexico. Drug cartels, murders in small American towns. All of this has made headlines in the last 4 months. But it's not just fentanyl. The dumping of commodities in the U.S. market and the lack of IP protection, spyware in the form of TikTok, scheduled to shut down January 19th at midnight, all of this is boiling and simmering just below the surface. And so, you know, this is really about how tough Trump is going to get on China. And he really wants, you know, the Canadians to make sure that once he seals off the Mexican border, Canada's not a problem. So that's what he told Trudeau last night. Trudeau won't be around to execute on that, but the message is clear to the Canadian people. It's not going to be business as usual. They're going to have to spend more money on maintaining that border and not making it porous, because there's been evidence of illegal immigration coming through the Canadian border in Quebec or in British Columbia, all of these places, and so, in Alberta as well. That's a very big open border, so it's going to have a lot more patrolling. Luckily, there's a lot of technology, a lot of drone technology, monitoring technology, infrared technology, satellite technology. This just has to be executed by the Canadians, and it's going to be made a priority. It's all going to happen. But fentanyl is, yes, important, but just one issue. And so Trump is just taking an attitude. Border means both borders. It means Canada and it means Mexico.
Sure, and I'm just wondering, I mean, just looking at the Donald Trump lineup for his inner circle, and of course Elon Musk is a big part of that. I mean, whether you see him having some involvement in this idea about imposing these tariffs, and also what you think he's going to bring to the table, just generally speaking, with regards to government efficiency.
Well, there's never been anything quite like Doge, if that's what you want to make reference to, because it's worth talking about. Two private citizens that have incredible executional skills, particularly in the case of what Elon Musk has achieved. He has a lot of respect within bipartisan votership. I mean, if you want to start saving money in government, it's not just a Republican or Democratic issue. And they want to talk about erasing trillions of dollars of waste. Most people know the federal government's full of waste. It's fat, it's sassy, it's never been controlled, deficits have never been higher. Nothing wrong with that. So you're getting Trump 2.0, which looks like he'll be a little bit more stable. Plus you're adding a whole dash of Doge to make the whole thing more interesting. Most people are going to cut a pretty broad swath for this administration for an extended period of time, at least 2 years, to see what they can achieve. So there's a fair amount of euphoria here in the U.S. right now amongst business leaders. Taxes will remain stable. The regulatory environment will be stripped away. Pretty well everything Biden tried to do will be erased. That's just the nature of presidential politics. We're going to be lighting up natural gas export, LNG, almost immediately. Executive orders will become flying out of the White House on the 21st of January. A lot of change coming. And it really was two different divisions in terms of the vision for each way the country was going to be run between the Democrats and the Republicans, and the voting constituency, by a landslide choice, decided they would go back the Trump way of doing things. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah, and just lastly, just to wrap up this conversation, I mean, we have had a pretty decent peek behind the curtain with regards to what Trump 2.0 is going to look like. We've been talking about tariffs, we've been talking about Doge. I mean, what are your sort of forecasts? What are your predictions as to where things head to with regards to job creation and trade deficit reduction under the new Trump presidency?
Well, you can see it now. One index of the optimism is the stock market itself hitting new highs, but there's also a lot of optimism in small business in America, which represents about 62% of job creation. They're waiting to see all the regulations peeled away. The Trump picks for cabinet positions are different than Trump 1.0. Most of these people are seasoned veterans. They're going to be around for the full 4 years. It's not going to be as much volatility. Trump is thinking legacy at this point. This is definitely his last election other than the midterms, but he wants to leave the country better than he found it. Every president does. And he is building a platform within the White House that's going to be remarkably different than the last time. There was a lot of volatility, if you want to use that word. But even he has said, look, I'm not going to make the same mistakes. I'm not going to hire people that don't know what they're doing. I'm going to get veterans that understand the system. He's done that in commerce. He's done that in Treasury. Health is a little controversial with Kennedy, but I actually think Kennedy will make it through the gauntlet because he has a lot of interesting ideas about food choices, of which I'm a huge advocate of. I'm just one person. But the whole idea is 2.0 is a more seasoned Trump, a more stable Trump, a more experienced Trump with an added dash of Doge. So a little extra cleaning fluid, if you want to call it that.
Sure. And just lastly, because I said that was the last question, but I actually have one more question to you, because I think last time you came on our channel, you talked about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin approaching the 100,000 mark, sort of slowly back and forth a little bit, around the 93,000 mark today. But I'm just wondering whether you think the Trump administration, the incoming Trump administration's got grand plans to regulate, or what you think they're going to change with regards to cryptocurrency regulation.
Yeah, when I last talked to you, Bitcoin was trading around 60, and it's now around 90. So a huge increase. The optimism around settling the regulatory environment around crypto in the United States and digital payment systems. Gensler's on his way out. We're talking about getting a crypto czar. CFTC, which is the commodities regulator, has been rumored to get more power around things like, is Ethereum a commodity or a security? All these things are going to get resolved. There's a stablecoin act floating around Congress right now to make the American dollar the de facto trading system for digital currency. All of this stuff is coming in the first 24 months. And so that's why you're seeing these markets so optimistic. The granddaddy digital currency, of course, is Bitcoin. It's the one that institutions want. And as soon as it's regulated and the lawsuits go away from the exchanges, SEC is suing Coinbase, the U.S.'s largest exchange, things will settle down, and you'll find 1 to 3% allocations institutionally, which will add another $1 trillion worth of demand. And so I think crypto is probably a pretty good bet. And certainly within our portfolios, we've added to it, and we're doing some rebalancing because no one saw this increase in such a short period of time with Bitcoin. I mean, if your mandate is you're only allowed to have 20% in crypto and no more than 5% in any one position, you've blown out the walls with what's occurred with Bitcoin. So we have had to do some rebalancing. But that's why you've seen the price peel back a little bit. I'm not the only person in that situation. It's happening all around the world.
OK, well, that really was the last question. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us once again here. Kevin O'Leary, thank you. After extensive negotiations led by the US envoy Amos Hochstein, Israel and Hezbollah, that's Lebanon's Iran-backed group, have agreed to a 60-day ceasefire, bringing to an end more than a year of conflict. Well, the deal went into effect on Wednesday morning, and under its terms, Israel is expected to halt operations in Lebanon and withdraw its troops from the south within 60 days, while Hezbollah fighters will pull back north of the Litani River. That's about 30 kilometers from the Israeli border, where Lebanon will deploy around 5,000 troops. Well, the war has cost Lebanon an estimated $8.5 billion in physical and economic damage. That's according to one estimate from the World Bank. Well, to talk to us more about this is Lebanon's Economy and Trade Minister, Amin Salam. Thank you so much for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya News. Reports that we've received suggest there have been some celebrations in Beirut. Hezbollah supporters portraying the truce as being a victory for them. Is that how it feels for people in Lebanon right now? Does this feel like a victory?
Hello, and thanks for having me with you guys. Well, let me tell you, it's a very happy day for Lebanon. It's a very important and critical day for Lebanon. I wouldn't put it in the context of victory. I wouldn't put it in the context of celebration. Yes, the Hezbollah base have been driving back to their homes, to the south, driving back to their cities to check on how things are. To them, it's a joyful moment that they're going back to their villages, their houses, their areas to see what's happening, because they have been displaced in very dire conditions for a long time. But I can tell you from a political perspective, it's not yet a time to celebrate. It's not yet a time to declare victory. It's a time to really monitor and hope that this ceasefire will accomplish its full targets and will pass those 60 difficult days, leading to a longer standing stability and peace for Lebanon and for the region. This is really how we are looking at it. This is how I'm reading it from my position, especially as Minister of Economy, which is the biggest struggle in this country today.
Does it feel like a fragile ceasefire when you look at it? I mean, let's not forget the bombardment of some areas of Beirut only ended less than 24 hours ago. So I know this is a difficult question to answer, but I mean, do you see it holding?
It is a very fragile ceasefire. I mean, you could feel even to the last minute or to the last few hours before the ceasefire, Lebanon was being bombed very aggressively. I can tell you from my location where I am now, yesterday I was in my office, bombs were all over this area. I mean, we could see them, we could feel them, we could hear them, ambulances all over the streets, still massive casualties. So this ceasefire is very, very fragile. That's why I'm using the term we should monitor carefully the next 60 days, because any escalation, any mistake, any bad intention from any side can lead to the complete destruction of all the good work, all the diplomatic work that has been done to lead to this ceasefire.
Some people will be wondering, and it must have felt like a very long few weeks of Israeli bombardment, but what took so long? Why couldn't this deal have been secured sooner?
Well, I can tell you, this deal is over 3 weeks old. I mean, the basic elements of this deal were already in place. The biggest problem with this deal was that the Israeli side, first of all, asked to put France outside the equation. That was a big blow to Lebanon, and that was a big blow to the deal. But the more important one was the one that related to the sovereignty and decision of the Lebanese people, including Hezbollah as well, for Israel to feel that they can intervene and they can assess any non-compliance of the 1701, where they can intervene immediately through the sky or through the land and break the ceasefire when they see appropriate, without having the US or any other country being involved. That was a major pending element of the deal that dragged it another 2 weeks until the United States stepped in and said, I will be the one that will bear this responsibility. I will assess if there was a non-compliance or if there was a violation of 1701 or of this agreement particularly, and then we will assess what needs to be done. Now, this has been kind of camouflaged in a certain political diplomatic way within the deal, but the US managed to help us get over that article and then get the approval from the Lebanese side, followed by the approval from the Israeli side.
Okay, so Israeli forces, we understand, are going to start leaving the border area in the south during the course of the next 60 days. And I'm wondering why people think that UNIFIL and the Lebanese army are going to be able to secure that border area when they failed to do so since the year 2006. What's going to be different this time?
What is different this time is a very simple new reality that has come to play. And that is the fact that today there is an approach, a regional approach going under a Middle East agreement, if we want to call it, especially with the new U.S. administration coming into the White House, that will follow the Saudi pledge for a zero-conflict region. So under a zero-conflict region approach, it is expected that a country like Lebanon that has a major conflict with Israel will be one of the countries that will follow the lead of a zero-conflict approach for a longer-standing peace in the region. Having said that, that means today, after all what happened, Hezbollah will be working closer with the Lebanese government on solutions in Lebanon and not on escalations in Lebanon, whether it's related directly to their role as a resilience group, especially that this role will be over once there is a peace process after the ceasefire with Israel or after there is an understanding for a long-standing peace. How that will shape up, we're still politically not there. But I think this is the only thing that changed that will give the international community today a strong reason to support the Lebanese army, contrary to what we had in the past. In the past, the Lebanese army was politically dragged into becoming weak because that was the direction in the region. That was how things were done. Today, there's a big push for the Lebanese army to be supported by the international community, to be funded by the international community, to govern and have sovereignty all over the Lebanese territory. And we see that happening. This will be the only path where Lebanon will join the zero conflict process and will witness a long-standing peace in the region.
Minister, one of your colleagues who has been extremely busy the last few weeks is, of course, the Parliament Speaker, Barratt, and he has been urging the swift election of a new president of Lebanon. He says this is of the utmost importance. I think everyone agrees on that. It's been talked about for months. Do you think it can now happen?
Well, we were hoping that when all this conflict started, we should seize the opportunity to be unified, all of us Lebanese people, Lebanese parties, to really elect the president. Because everybody knows that one of the major hurdles of electing a president is internal in Lebanon. And now, what we have been through the past year, and particularly the past few months, have brought Lebanese people closer together. We have felt more unity than ever before amongst the different political parties. And I think the Speaker of the House is one of the top politicians that read opportunities and seize opportunities. And today he is a key player in the ceasefire. He sees that there is a serious opportunity now to take advantage of the positive momentum amongst the political parties to bring them back to the parliament and to elect the president, because he knows and we know that the next stage which will require a head of state and a fully fledged government to negotiate and have a seat on the table in the region for the future of the Middle East, the future of Lebanon, the role of Lebanon in the Middle East. Without a head of a state, without a proper government in place, we will always be a weak link and we will not get our best share of the deal.
Indeed, and having a fully functioning government does not mean, does it, the end of Lebanon's problems? Because for 5 years now, the country's been in financial, economic turmoil. Millions of Lebanese people are living a very difficult existence, plunged into poverty. How is the country going to rebuild? Because this is where you come into play.
Well, I mean, as you know, we've shared a lot of details, I think, in our last get-together on TV, and our last interview about the economy, the billions of dollars, the losses. I think, to answer your question in a very clear way, the only path forward is having a full government in place, reflecting confidence to the international community, particularly regaining very fast the trust of the international community by complying with all the international agreements, including 1701, the Lebanese army moving forward with its presence on the entire territory. But most importantly for the economy, I would say, and for rebuilding Lebanon, and we all know that without the international community, we will not be able to do that. We will need to very, very, very quickly go with the reforms that we have been dragging our feet on for the past few years. We should move forward with the reforms immediately. We should portray and reflect trust to the international community, particularly to the Arab world. Otherwise, it will be difficult to ask anyone for help. It will be difficult to expect that money will be poured on Lebanon to rebuild what has been destroyed and to join the future of economic growth and prosperity in the Middle East. Without doing those, Lebanon will not join that path. And we are hoping we will be able to join that path.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us once again here on Al Arabiya News. Amin Salam. Thank you. Well, for more analysis, I'm joined now by Mick Mulvaney, the former Chief of Staff to the US President-elect Donald Trump. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Mr. Mulvaney. I just want to ask you, first of all, to whom do we give the most credit, do you think? Who deserves the credit for bringing this deal about, which has resulted in a ceasefire in Lebanon?
Well, Tom, thanks for having me. I think you sort of anticipate the answer by your question, which is everyone will always seek to take credit. There's no question about that. My guess is Donald Trump, sitting in Mar-a-Lago here this week, will be making the case, and in fact is making the case that one of the reasons this deal got cut is that Hezbollah was afraid of what he might do when he comes into office in January. At the same time, I'm sure the Biden administration will take credit for doing the hard work necessary to get it done. I think at the end of the day, very few people here really care that much about who takes the credit. We're just glad that the deal was arranged.
Okay, so you would say it's fair to say, therefore, something of a parting victory for the outgoing Biden administration, nevertheless?
Look, I remember back in 1979 when after Ronald Reagan got elected, shortly thereafter, the Iranians released the American hostages. Reagan took credit. Carter took credit. There's no, success has many mothers and failure is an orphan. So I don't think that many people here outside of the immediate Trump circle and the immediate Biden circle are worried that much about who gets the credit.
Okay, this is, of course, a 60-day truce, and we all know that in 60 days from now there'll be a new administration in the White House. And I just wonder what you think the return of Donald Trump, and I know you've already touched on it briefly, but what do you think his return will mean specifically for this deal?
Well, for this deal and for the broader deal, Trump is going to be a lot more aggressive, I think, than Biden is. Certainly his language will be more aggressive. We know that from his first term in office. But he is not afraid to play at a little bit higher stakes. And I think he's arguably a little bit more aligned with Israel than Joe Biden was. In fact, I think certainly you could make that case. So how the immediate swearing in of Donald Trump takes place in January, which takes place in January, will affect the outcome. It sort of remains to be seen. But generally speaking, I think that Donald Trump is going to be tougher on Iran than Joe Biden was.
Yeah, there is a lot of speculation that now the Lebanon problem is resolved, at least for the next 60 days, perhaps attention will shift to Gaza and, as you say as well, to Iran. And I just wonder what specifically on Iran Mr. Trump might have in store.
Well, look, face it, we look at least the Republicans in this country, not the least of which Donald Trump, look at Hezbollah and Hamas through the lens of Iran. Without Iran's influence, Hamas and Hezbollah would not be nearly the difficulties that they are. So I think you can expect a much tougher position on the Iranian nuclear program. That's been proven to be the case already. We had a very soft, sort of dovish attitude towards Iran under the Obama administration. It was much more hawkish under Donald Trump in his first administration, a little bit more to the other extreme with Joe Biden. Now the pendulum will be swinging back again with Donald Trump. So if you ask the general question, what will Donald Trump be like on Iran, on Hezbollah, on Hamas in his second term, the answer is pretty much the same as the first.
Okay, and with regards to Gaza, how hopeful are you that now, as I said, Lebanon is resolved, perhaps normal life can start being rebuilt for the Lebanese people? What do you see happening for the people of Gaza?
Well, certainly resolving the issue in Lebanon will make Gaza simpler. I don't want to use easier because it's still a very difficult situation, and it's going to continue to be. But at least now there's only one sort of variable in the conversation. If you can put the Lebanese Hezbollah issue to bed for at least 60 days, and I'm hoping that it lasts longer than that, then you can focus all of our attention here in the U.S. And in your part of the world towards Gaza. Whether or not Hamas is willing to make the sacrifices necessary or make the agreements necessary in order to get peace remains to be seen. But now they'll be back out on their own again, which I think puts the Israelis in a much better position.
Now, you'd know the answer to this question, and I'm curious to know what you think. But don't foreign policy issues invariably look much easier to an administration in opposition than they do to the actual administration that's in office? Because, of course, the administration in office has access to material, to intelligence reports that people outside the administration don't have. Do you think that is the case? And do you think perhaps the reality of the situation is quite different from how it may appear to a party in opposition, i.e. on the campaign trail for Donald Trump and his party?
Sure. I think that's the case for not just global issues, matters of foreign policy, but for most issues. Inflation looks a lot more simple to you when you are in opposition than you are the ruling party, and that's not probably unique to the United States of America. But certainly the issue in Gaza is going to continue to be complicated. Might it be simplified a little bit for purposes of campaigns? Absolutely. There's no question about that. I don't think the average voting American has the time or the interest to get down into every little detail about what's happening in Gaza. So campaigning necessarily probably simplifies that a little bit. But to your point, yes, when you are in office, things are probably a little bit more complicated, and you are playing for keeps. You're playing with real stakes, as we say in the United States. When you're in opposition on the outside looking in, you can be as critical as you want to without much sort of real world implications. But when you're the party in charge, you're playing with real money.
I'd just like to ask you, Mr. Mulvaney, about the new U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mick Huckabee. And I'd just like to ask you what you think he and his appointment will bring to the region.
Yeah, I've talked to Mr. Governor Huckabee. He was the former governor of the state of Arkansas, ran for president. I know him relatively well. I'm close with his daughter. She and I work together in the White House. And I've talked to him briefly since his designation as the future U.S. ambassador. I think he brings some clarity of purpose, some clarity of policy, but most importantly, and this applies, I think, around the world, he has a direct line of communication into the White House. I was a special envoy in Northern Ireland after my term in the White House, and one of the things that I thought was the most valuable to me as an envoy of my government, as a member of the diplomatic corps, was to be able to pick up the phone and call the President of the United States directly. And Mike Huckabee will have that. That type of thing makes decision-making quicker, perhaps more effective, and also allows the communication to be clearer and crisper with less less chance of miscommunication and so forth. So I think it's an excellent pick. I've talked to various communities here in this group, in this country, including some of the Arab American groups and the Israeli American groups, and generally they seem pleased with the decision. Mr. Huckabee has a great deal of credibility, especially within the White House, and I think he'll make an excellent ambassador.
And I'd like to just ask you lastly about the other nominees in the incoming Trump administration, particularly those with a foreign policy portfolio, and what you think they mean for specifically the Middle East.
It's a fascinating sort of process, and we saw this a little bit in the first iteration of the Trump administration, in that Trump likes to surround himself with people who disagree with him and disagree with each other. And disagreement is not to be confused with disloyalty. He's hiring very loyal people. Every president does. But there are people who coming into the White House who see the world generally differently than he does. Marco Rubio, the incoming Secretary of State, would be considered to be more of a neoconservative sort of personality. The same could be said of the incoming national security advisor. This was true, by the way, in the first administration when President Trump brought in John Bolton, who didn't agree with the president on a lot of different things, but the president valued his input into the communication. So what you're going to see again in the second version of Trump is a variety of perspectives inside the White House. There will be people who will be more neoconservative when it comes to foreign policy, those who will be more non-interventionist. There will be folks who are fiercely pro-Israel and folks who are more neutral on issues that happen in the Gulf and so forth. So you'll see a variety of issues, a variety of perspectives brought to the table. And I think that's reflective of the people he's naming so far to the cabinet.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time today. Mick Mulvaney, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Tom.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again on Monday for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.
We go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Prime Minister, I'd like to kick off by asking you to walk us through how you see the election of Donald Trump playing out in this part of the world, and specifically what it means for your government.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. Obviously, we congratulate the United States for having a successful election. This is a decision for the American people to decide what kind of a government they want. But obviously, as you said, a decision made in the United States have an effect on the globe and definitely on our region as well. We've had an experience with the previous government of President Trump. And this time also, we are hoping that the U.S. administration is going to maintain good relations with the region, with Iraq, and in particular with the Kurdistan region that's been a very credible partner with the United States in the fight against terrorism and also in promoting peace and developing the shared values and principles that we have with each other. It's a little premature to decide how it will play out. We have to wait until the whole cabinet is picked and decided, but we definitely have friends among people that we hear are being considered to be in the next government.
So you're seeing encouraging signs so far?
Well, I would like to be optimistic, yes.
In your mind, when you take a step back and think about what happens next, obviously it's difficult to foresee the next couple of years, but President-elect Trump has said that he will end all the conflicts, happening right now in the world, and he specifically mentioned that in the Middle East and those in Europe. Do you believe that that's an achievable goal?
Well, I hope that there will be peaceful solutions to every ongoing conflict and war. However that's achieved, I believe it will serve the people of those countries that are suffering from the ongoing wars now. But I hope that these decisions are made in consultation with the parties involved, that the interests of the people are going to be taken into account. I don't know how this is going to be done. We hear that through force, peace can be promoted. Maybe that's the policy of this new administration. We have to wait and see. But in any case, we do believe that peace is going to be better than war anyway.
Are you worried about the possibility that Baghdad will be drawn into this conflict? We've already seen overt and behind the closed doors pressure coming from Israel towards Baghdad.
Of course we are worried and we are concerned about what's happening. We don't want Iraq to be dragged into this war. We don't think that this is an Iraqi war. We believe that if Iraq can play a constructive, positive role in promoting peace and bringing sides together, that's good. But to add fuel to the fire and to make things more complicated, to expand the war and conflict, it's not going to be in the best interest of the Iraqi people. And I hope that the Iraqi government will look at the interest of the Iraqi people more than the interest of anyone else.
President-elect Trump has made no secret of his support for Israel and its government, particularly its Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a man who has just been sanctioned by the International Criminal Court. Do you believe that will be a barrier to peace?
Well, I don't know, but I believe that any step towards promoting peace must be supported, and anything that distracts peace or any initiative should be reconsidered. So I don't know exactly how this is going to play out, but I do believe that the players must come to some agreement that there must be different ways of reaching a sustainable solution to the ongoing conflicts.
Walk me through this one. There are many schools of thought on this, but to your mind, how difficult is it going to be for Iraq, for the Iraqi people, and frankly for the stability of the region, if President-elect Trump decides to withdraw U.S. troops from Iraq?
Well, look, the U.S. troops were in Iraq based on the invitation from the Iraqi government, and there was a reason. There was ISIS, terrorism, that was threatening the security of the region and actually the security of the whole world. We have that first experience here in Kurdistan, and our Peshmergas were fighting ISIS, and we wanted the coalition forces, the Americans, to come to our help and assist us, and they thankfully did. There was a coalition of forces that came to support Iraq and within Iraq, Kurdistan. Now, if the overall assessment of terrorism has changed, and if Iraq believes that terrorism has come to an end, therefore we don't need American troops here, or we need to end the mission of the coalition forces. That's a different situation. And we may have different ideas, to be frank with you. We don't think that terrorism has come to an end. We think that still ISIS is intact and they have active members. They are active in different parts of, not only in Iraq, but in the region, elsewhere in the world. And we need to have that global coalition to fight terrorism. Now, in terms of organizing or reviewing the relationship of Iraq with the coalition forces, can be different than what's been said. If the mission is no longer needed because Iraq feels it's stronger today and it can face the challenges and control the security situation in the country, that doesn't mean that the relationship between Iraq and the United States will come to an end. So ending the coalition forces or the coalition mission doesn't mean the end of U.S.-Iraqi relationship, even military relationship. So we hope that for as long as Iraq can manage its relationship with all of its partners, whether it's the United States, UK, France, Germany, Italy, any other European country, on bilateral levels to maintain the good relations where Iraq can benefit from the friendship that is developed with all these partners, we believe that there is a way that can manage and perhaps be less risky in terms of looking at whether or not the security situation is going to be affected by the departure of the coalition forces.
Would it surprise you if U.S. troops were to stay outside of a coalition, perhaps, in some arrangement?
Whether this would surprise me? No.
No.
No. Look, U.S. is staying in many other countries in the region. Not only in Iraq, but in many other Middle Eastern countries. We have U.S. forces. So it's very normal for the U.S. forces to stay in Iraq and have bilateral relations with Baghdad.
When you take a step back and look at what's happened over the last several years, the chaos that's ensued under, frankly, the leadership of the Biden administration in Washington, many people would say the catalyst for President Putin's invasion of Ukraine and what's been happening in Gaza was U.S. inaction and U.S. failure with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. In your mind, has that set a precedent for U.S. activity in the region?
Can you repeat your question?
In your mind, did the disastrous withdrawal by the Biden administration from Afghanistan set a precedent for U.S. activity in this region?
Well, I think any unilateral decision is not going to be the best decision, in my view. U.S. was invited by the Iraqis, and any departure has to be mutually agreed. The mechanism, the timing, and the way that it needs to depart. But any unilateral decisions, while we have so many pressing issues, is going to cause new problems. And we've had this experience in 2011. In 2011, when the U.S. pulled out their forces, even then, we didn't think that was the best decision, and we anticipated that U.S. will come back, but at a higher cost, which was the case, because the vacuum left after the U.S. pulled out their troops was filled by ISIS and other terrorist organizations, and U.S. had to come back once again. So I hope that there are good decisions and well-calculated decisions. If U.S. wants to pull out, we need to look at what would be the alternative and how those vacuums created behind are going to be filled. We don't want to create another problem.
What's the best case scenario in your mind for your government from a Trump administration? What would you like to see them do?
In Kurdistan region? Well, we have very good relations with the United States. We want to continue having good relations. We want to continue having security cooperation. We want to continue and develop economic relations with the United States. The more development in the region means more stability, and more economic stability leads to more political stability and definitely to more security. So more U.S. engagement in the region, I believe, is going to help the region.
Talk to me about what's happening today with the oil law. What is the status of that legislation?
Iraq doesn't have an oil law. We have a law that belongs to the Saddam's era, which is designed for a central government. It doesn't help a federal system. We have a federal country today. We have a federal system. That centralized law is not helpful in organizing relations between Baghdad and Erbil. And unfortunately, after Baghdad decided to abolish all the previous laws, there is this law still in place, which is shocking. And we need to replace that with a new law. There was a draft back in 2007, but unfortunately was never passed through the parliament. We still believe that we need to have a modern law that is good for a federal system. And once we have that, I believe we can overcome many of the existing problems between Baghdad and Erbil.
Walk us through how much the failure to export is hurting your government. And I'm talking to the tune of $20 billion that you've lost so far.
Yes, almost every month we lose $1 billion. So it's over $20 billion that we've lost as a result of the export of...
They're bleeding you dry.
Sorry?
They're bleeding you dry.
Well, unfortunately, this is hurting the rest of the country as well. But definitely, the biggest part of the country that's suffering is Kurdistan. Unfortunately, the losses that we have suffered are not being compensated. We see the delays in the salary payment, we see reduction in the revenues of the overall Iraqi revenues, which is not in the interest of the federal government nor in the Kurdistan region.
Yeah, Baghdad seems to characterize this shutdown of your exports as a way to assuage fears in the broader OPEC Plus group about their production concerns. And I'm talking about the fact that they want Baghdad to stick to its production numbers just like every other member of OPEC Plus is supposed to. In your mind, is that a fair assessment to put that on you?
No. Look, Iraq is producing a certain amount of oil barrels per day, and they have a quota in OPEC. But I can say that what we produce in Kurdistan is much less than what we deserve according to the percentage that Kurdistan is entitled to produce. So let's assume that Iraq is producing more than 4 million or 4.5 million barrels per day. Now the numbers have changed though. But Kurdistan is entitled to produce at least 500,000 barrels. We are producing even less than half of that. So to tell us to reduce production, it's not fair because the overall Iraqi production of oil needs to be reduced according to the quotas designed for Iraq. And it doesn't have to always come on, at the cost of the production in Kurdistan.
How concerned are you by the fact that global oil production and global oil prices are, frankly, falling? Because that will impact your bottom line as well.
We are concerned, but let me tell you one thing. We in Kurdistan have realized that depending on oil as the only revenue for the country is always going to be problematic because the price of oil is not designed by the country. There is a global market for it. So it could go up, it could go down. When price of oil is high, then Iraq can benefit, but when it's down, it's going to affect the function of the government because the budget is not going to basically, be able to support the government's, functions. In Kurdistan, we've realized that. That's why we try to diversify our economy. We try to look at different sources of revenues to invest in agriculture, invest in different industries, invest in tourism to make sure that even if oil is no longer the only revenue or, it's not generating enough revenues for us, we have different sources of revenue. Yeah. I believe that Iraq should have done that. And we look at different parts of the world, especially the oil producers. They're using the revenues generated from oil and investing in different sectors so that to secure different sources for revenues for themselves when even oil is dried out and no longer is available. Iraq is not at that stage, and that is concerning. Mm-hmm. We are concerned about that, but we strongly encourage the federal government in Baghdad, and we certainly in Kurdistan are focusing on how we should diversify our economy to at least reduce the influence of the oil price on our economy.
There's a concern that those here in your part of the world are trucking refined product to Iran. In your mind, is that a practice that should be stopped? Because that is a country, of course, that is under international sanctions.
Well, the sanctions have been imposed, and I don't think that now there is anything legally going through Iran. So it's been stopped, after the new sanctions on the productions, not only on the oil, but on the productions has been imposed, there has been a decision not to send any of those products to Iran.
So, to your knowledge, that isn't happening?
Illegally, it may be happening in some places, but not under our control.
Walk me through this. You mentioned other partners and finding other partners for investment. Obviously, the conversation earlier in the day surrounded China's influence in this part of the world, the symbiosis with the United States on multiple issues and how that's evolving and may evolve under a new administration in Washington. Does the current attitude towards China coming from Washington hurt your government in terms of investment potential?
In what sense?
Well, does it keep you from partnering with countries like China that the U.S. may have a problem with from time to time?
Look, we have good relations with the United States and with all of our Western friends. But that doesn't mean that we can't have good relations with China or any other country in the world. We have a free economy, and we are inviting anyone to come and invest in our region, and we hope that our friends would compete over who can come and invest first in Kurdistan. Yeah. But if someone doesn't want to come and invest, they shouldn't be able to stop others to come and invest.
Yeah. So a trade war with China, how does that impact you?
Well, Chinese are in Iraq and also in Kurdistan. They're already investing, and we have a law of investment, and whoever is complying and accepting our regulations and is wishing to invest in Kurdistan is welcomed.
Yeah, this has been an argument, of course, that the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Qatar have faced as well, pressure from the United States not to partner with China on a variety of issues and technologies, for example. Do you think it's fair?
To be fair, we are not being pressured to not, have investments from the Chinese by the Americans or the Western countries.
Well, how would you characterize it? Discouraged?
Well, obviously anyone would be interested in coming and investing themselves, so we encourage them to come and invest if they want to, but no one's forced us to not have relations with China if they wish to invest in our region.
Given the current state of global affairs, do you think that this will force the United States to be more pragmatic in its approach?
Well, I think they have to be, because look, Chinese are investing in the United States. Chinese are investing in Europe. Why can't they invest in our region? I mean, that's a question, right? So whenever you answer that question, I'll answer the rest of your questions.
Talk to me a bit about your relationship today with Turkey. Is that a complex relationship?
We have good relations with Turkey. We have good economic trade and relations with Turkey. We have good understanding on the security situation in the region. And we are also encouraged by the fact that Turkey is looking at different peaceful ways to sort out the problems in the region.
Yeah.
So I would characterize our relations with Turkey as good and even better.
Yeah. And Russia?
With Russia also, we have normal relations. We have Russian companies operating in Kurdistan. We have Rosneft and Gazprom Neft that are already operating in Kurdistan region and the rest of Iraq.
I want to get a sense from you of how you see the regional dynamics changing, and particularly with regards to Syria. Obviously, over the last several months, we've seen an increased number of visits between Bashar al-Assad and his partners in Saudi Arabia, his partners in UAE, things that wouldn't have happened perhaps a few years ago. And the U.S. being so tied up perhaps with other conflicts in the world and conflicts in the region, not really raising much of an eyebrow there. In your mind, are we going to see Syria reintegrated, not just regionally, but globally?
You see, when we're talking about Syria, we have to be careful about what part of Syria we're talking about. There is not one government controlling the entire territories of Syria. We have Syrian government, we have Russia, we have Iran, we have Turkey, we have the United States, we have the rest of the coalition. So we have different groups controlling different parts of the country. But if you mean the government in Damascus, we've seen that over the years, There was a maximum pressure on the government. Everybody was calling for the overthrow of the regime. And now there is, once again, reopening the channels with the government and trying to reintegrate into first to the Arab League and also to the international community. I think it depends on the cost of whatever action you take. If the decision is to overthrow the regime, you have to look at the cost of that and the meaning of what that means actually to the rest of the region and the rest of the players. And if integrating the government into the international community will bring more peace, I think that's something that I believe now many countries are looking at.
Yeah. If the Trump administration were to enact maximum pressure 2.0, for example, do you believe that would accelerate Syria's return to the international order?
I don't know about Syria, but I believe every actor has to rethink. If they want to benefit from normal relations with the United States and other players in the region, they have to perhaps revive their current policies and adopt a new policy that's acceptable, and that would go with for Syria as well, I think.
Yeah. There's a narrative in the West that Iraq is held hostage, that Baghdad is held hostage to Iran. Is that a fair assessment?
Is
that Iraq is held hostage by Iran?
Well, that's your terminology. But there is a lot of influence. Iran has a lot of influence in Iraq. That's true. Now, whether this is a decision that Iraqis have made or it's a decision that's been imposed, I think you better ask that question, ask Baghdad that question. Is this something that they are happy with or not? But we definitely know that Iran is an important neighbor for Iraq, and it's normal for Iraq to have normal relations with Iran. Now, the level of influence and the nature of relations between Baghdad and Iran, I don't control that. You have to ask them.
I'm waiting for my invitation. Walk me through this one. When you think about what happens next with regards to the internal politics, and I'm talking about the regional dynamic, we've seen enormous strides for women made in Saudi Arabia, something that those of us who cover the region never thought perhaps we would see. We've seen women, of course, taking a major role in the UAE government, for example. Half of the parliament are women. And we see strides made for women here in your government as well. But it seems as if in Baghdad, things are really rolling back. And I'm talking about the possibility that children can be married off at the age of 9. Many in the international human rights community now say that this is tantamount to child rape. In your mind, is that worrying?
Yes. Iraq was one of the most advanced Middle Eastern countries in terms of promoting women's rights. Unfortunately, there are factors that are affecting and influencing the rights of women in countries where poverty, injustice, illiteracy is widespread. And unfortunately, over the years, Iraq hasn't been in its best capacity. We've seen that there is a lot of illiteracy, there is a lot of women that are dropping out of college and school. Definitely this is going to affect the behavior of the society and also the women themselves, the lack of confidence, and that they don't want to participate in the community. In Kurdistan, we have, I think, in a different situation. Our culture is also different. If you look at our history, women have always had greater freedom, and they have had more rights. And over the years, we have tried to give more power to women by promoting their participation in the parliament. There are many parliamentarians that are women today, and many ministers in the cabinet that are women, and many directors and many administrators that are now women. And many women are now businesswomen, very successful businesswomen. So we're trying to give equal opportunities. I'm a little sensitive about saying women's rights because I think they have to have equal rights as men, and you need to pave the road for them.
And just to be clear, that means you would advocate for equal pay for equal work?
Yes.
Every time?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that something you enforce in your government?
Well, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. In your mind, what are the things that can be used in the private sector to encourage that? And I'm talking about women on boards.
Look, you need to protect everyone's rights. Let's forget women, okay? Let's talk about citizens, humans. Everyone in the country should have equal rights. There are people who are in the public sector, and there are people who are in the private sector. One of the reasons why private sector in the country has been weak, because they were afraid of retirement. In the private sector, there was no law for anyone that after a few years that they would be retired and they would have pension afterwards. Now we have passed a law in Kurdistan to secure the retirement for private sector as well. This is encouraging many people to not seek the government employment or the public sector, but to look at private sector. So if you provide more opportunities for them, if you create an environment where private sector can grow, I believe that's going to take care of many of the pressing issues that we are facing today. Not only about women, but about the whole economy.
Yeah. In your mind, what is the greatest existential threat to this region today?
Wow, this is a very tough question.
I have a reputation.
I think lack of trust. I think, history has proven that when communities don't trust each other, when systems are built on imposing ideas, when stronger players are dictating and disrespecting others, when democracy means only the rule of majority without regarding the rule of minorities, that's difficult to handle, and it's difficult to create a society where everybody would be happy. You need to feel the sense of belonging, and in order to belong to a society or to a country, you need to feel that you're equal. So the lack of equality, the lack of trust, I believe, is the source of many of the problems that we have.
How do you address that lack of trust? How do you address that lack of trust?
Reverse that. Build trust and provide, equal environments and, be just. So that's exactly what's needed.
Yeah.
And if we can build trust and provide equal opportunities to everyone, I think that will take care of it.
Do you still believe the United States is a partner to trust?
The United States? Yes, I do. Because, look, United States is not just about one person or one administration. United States is a successful country based on values of democracy and principles of equality and freedom. So, yes, U.S. wouldn't be successful if it wasn't a place that was built on the right foundations. And when you have institutions that endorse these foundations, needs to be trusted.
Your Excellency, thank you so much. Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern were too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show